mistakes, Vice Mayor Hill. I was not the last one to come up. I'm just saying,
What is this?
that's your cell phone.
Yes, ma'am. Everybody has one?
Good.
What's going on?
Thank you, sorry about this. I think this is the first time in 7 years I'll let that happen. Always every first time. Phew, that's a relief.
Good evening.
Evening.
I call this meeting to order.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance.
All right, Mr. Wheeler, roll call, please.
Dr. Bellamy,
Present.
Ms. Hill,
Here.
Ms. Walker,
Present.
Mr. Signer,
Here.
Ms. Galvin.
Here.
All right. Any announcements? No? All right. Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak on the consent agenda before it's read? Okay.
On the consent agenda, item A, minutes from November 19th and November 26th. Item B, an appropriation, Urban Construction Initiative Annual Meeting, $2,064.02, second of two readings. Item C, an appropriation, Special Nutrition Program Food Grant, $32,000, second of two readings. Item D, an appropriation, the Community Forest Grant for land acquisition at Ragged Mountain, $600,000, second of two readings. Item E, an appropriation, City Schools Check and Connect Student Engagement Grant for $62,691, second of two readings. Item F, an appropriation, Drug Treatment Court Administration Grant, $293,745, second of two readings. Item G, an appropriation, Runaway Emergency Shelter Program Grant, $209,444, second of two readings. And then we have two appropriations related to the Charlottesville Affordable Housing Fund. The first is a repayment of a substantial rehab loan in the amount of $28,282, second of two readings. And item I, the second item, repayment of a substantial rehab loan in the amount of $23,478.94, second of two readings. Item J, an appropriation, Water Street Parking Garage supplemental appropriation, $977,155, second of two readings. Item K, an appropriation, VDOT Recreational Access Grant for the McIntyre Park Bicycle and Pedestrian Bridge, $125,000, first of two readings. Item L, an appropriation, the 2018 Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant, $26,044, first of two readings. Item M, an appropriation, 2019 Aid to Localities Funding for Fire Programs, $150,480, first of two readings. Item N, a resolution, East High Streetscape Concept, first of one reading. And then items O, P, and Q are all quitclaim gas easements. The first in the North Berkshire Road to VDOT, second of two readings. Item P, Dunlora subdivision to VDOT, second of 2 readings. And item Q, Hollymead Town Center subdivision to VDOT, second of 2 readings.
Is there a motion?
I move to accept.
Is there a second?
Second?
Are there any questions or comments? Anyone from the public? Again? No? All right. You can vote. All right, and it carries 5-0. Mr. Murphy, you don't have any items
No, Madam
this
Mayor.
week, okay? So we don't have any city manager response items to the public. And so that,
Madam Mayor, do you want to let everyone know the change to our agenda?
Yeah, the postponement of.
oh, so when we get there, we will not be item 6 on the agenda, the amendment to the Charlottesville Almar Convention and Visitor Bureau Operating Agreement. That will be back on the agenda in January. So we are removing it from tonight. Do we have to have a motion, Mr. Blair?
No, ma'am, I think your announcement's sufficient.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, so that moves us right into probably the fastest community matters ever. So here we are. First, we have Joan Fenton. No? All right,
Not present.
yeah. Bill Emery.
Mayor Walker, city councilors, my name's Bill Emery.
Good evening.
I live at 1604 East Market Street. Item 5 this evening is a dilemma. You're damned if you approve the rezoning as is, and you're damned if the housing isn't built. The Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, known by the acronym LIHTC, pronounced LIHTC, was brought online during Ronald Reagan's presidency to get rich people involved, providing financing for affordable housing for their low-income brothers and sisters. There are hundreds of LIHTC units in the city of Charlottesville. Who represents the residents of LIHTC? They don't have a residents group like FAR. All they have is you, city council. What do the residents need? They haven't spoken up about this item this evening. But meanwhile, use approximations of statements collected by FAR and their community engagement, the positive vision for redevelopment, as your guide to things that can occur in the 154-unit Carlton Avenue LIHTC PUD. Preserve and improve green and open space. Children need better play areas located in central areas in the neighborhoods. Maximize yard and porch spaces. Community gardens provide healthy food. Community centers and playgrounds need to be constructed to help build community in the center of sites easily visible. With good design, all these things are possible for the 154 households at Carlton Views. Hit the pause button. Take some deep breaths, defer. Vote on the matter in January when it's ready for prime time. I want to quote from one of the planning commissioners, November 13, Ms. Jody Lahindra. I hate to see the precedent set that if it's an affordable housing development, then it doesn't deserve good community planning. End of quote. We need planning specific to this area. Is Hogwaller a target area where the city locates affordable housing? If so, this is a tough place to live. It's a food and services desert. We need to plan for the residents. These developers have revised their narrative and plan many times. For instance, in October of 2014, when you all were preparing to pony up close to $1 million for Carlton Views 1, Kathy McHugh reported, "It is believed this, Carlton Views 1, will primarily benefit users of the PACE Center. Most of the units will be for seniors with a disability. There are only 3 current residents of Carlton Views that use the Pace Center. So to FER,
Thank
there's a
you.
middle way, a path out of the dilemma. Thank you.
Thanks. Mary Carey. Mark Cabot.
Mark Cabot, 400 Altamont Street. If I can get my phone here working. Earlier this evening, council and many others were sent an email from Kimber Hockley that she and I put together. It addresses concern of the proposed development for Nassau Street. I trust you will take the time to examine the documents, including the 1971 Army Corps of Engineer report, basically recommended no development in this area that we commonly refer to as Hogwaller or Nassau Street. It's a very in-depth biography, and it will take some time, but I hope that you all at least look at some of the main points of it. It also has been sent out, or will be sent out tomorrow to a lot of the media people in town in addition. I wanted to address the Carlton View complex. Earlier today, I sent out an email to one of the council members, and I'm going to hand these out and ask that they be handed out to everybody. I'm going to leave off when we read the first 2 sentences, but an opportunity was missed to make this a good PUD. The Planning Commission last May did not approve the PUD as it did not meet the requirements of the PUD. Last month, a new and inexperienced Planning Commission made a political decision to basically use the same plan that was presented in May, not a land use plan. There were many items that a PUD is supposed to contain. This plan was approved, the plan that was approved does not contain many of them. The developer should have been required to provide them. I would recommend that you reread Bill's email that I know that he sent you earlier, because we do not want to merely want this to be merely a warehouse where we store people. We must provide anemones. I recommend that this really should be sent back to the Planning Commission and basically do what the Planning Commission wanted to do and see back when they first saw this in May at that time. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Michael Payne.
Hello, Michael Payne, city resident. I would just like to speak on the Carlton Views apartment complex that is on the agenda tonight, and I would like to speak emphatically in support of the project. I live right by this, and these are the kind of projects the city needs to support and engage in if we actually are serious about meeting the affordable housing need and constructing more units that are affordable for people in the city. This is a project that includes units for people at 40% of AMI and below. It would be part of a mixed income neighborhood. It is a project that fits with neighborhood character. It's a project that, living right by here, I can say emphatically that yes, I do want it in my backyard. I think this is exactly the kind of projects we need to support. And if we don't, I just don't see how the city is actually serious about meeting our affordable housing shortfall and reaching that number of over 3,000 affordable housing units. Our zoning that is restrictive and that doesn't only allow single-family homes, that doesn't allow duplexes and triplexes and apartment complex, is rooted in racist policy that was meant to exclude working families and non-white people from living in neighborhoods in the city. And we really have to think deeply about how we're going to reform our zoning to allow higher density, to allow duplexes and triplexes and apartment complex, to make sure that people can afford to live in the city. And particularly a project like this with units for people at 40% of AMI and below in a neighborhood like this. I think is just really low-hanging fruit we have to go for. And I would also say in the proffer, it says that they're offering to build a public transportation stop if the city advises it. I would really encourage the city to go along with that, especially for a project like this near a lot of people who are older residents with disabilities. That's something that's really valuable. There's no public transportation stop in the area that even has a covered over it currently. And I know anytime these projects tend to come up, the people who come to you tend to say, we don't want it, we don't want more density, but think different, think bigger, because if you don't, the truth is you are not going to get to 3,000 new affordable housing units ever. Thank you.
Louis Schultz. Robert Woodside.
Good afternoon, or good evening. My name's Rob Woodside. I'm a lifelong city resident, born and raised. My parents met right after UVA, and I'm a graduate of the Charlottesville High School. Go Black Knights. I know what it's like to have a job that's underappreciated and underthanked, and I just want to take a few minutes to thank each one of you specifically and personally. So, Mayor Walker, thank you so much for being a voice of the under and unappreciated in this town. Vice Mayor Hill, thank you for your systematic and grounded approach to governing. Councilor Bellamy, thank you so much for taking up the problem of affordable housing in this city, as we've already heard, and going literally all around the country to find different solutions for this. Thank you. Councilor Gavin, thank you for your almost 30 years of public service and over a decade, or 8 years on this council, if that's correct. I'm sure a tenure that long in public service is hard and long and weighs heavy on you. So thank you very much. And Councilor Signer, thank you for connecting our city with other localities. Knowing what works and what doesn't is important in government, especially in running a town personally. So I just wanted to thank all the councilors and let you know that you are appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Rosia Parker.
Hello.
Good evening.
I'm not gonna be here too long, but Mr. Murphy,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm gonna come back to you again. Still 2 years and some change later. And you told me that what I asked for was done. And it's still not done. And it's still bent up at Main Street and 8th Street. It's not been taken care of. And I said that the last time, which you told me was done, so you tried to make me like I was a liar. And I told you it wasn't done. I was going to take a picture and bring it, but it wasn't done. Mr. Bellamy and Miss Galvin, it's been a month. The last conversation we had was the end of November. So what are we going to do about these plaques?
The Vinegar Hill plaques?
All of our plaques.
I thought we were.
No.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Mayor Walker, can I just say something?
Do you want to finish
Do you want
first?
to finish, or do you want
Oh,
to
I'm
answer?
finished.
Okay.
I did speak to Andrea Douglas, who was the person that worked with me on the whole kind of resolution to get the Court Square redesign, and that included the slave block. And so she and I will be getting together with her to figure out how we can move forward on that, because it was all part of this whole bigger plan. But now that the courts have slowed down the whole process, we're going to have to rethink how we do that. So I just want to let you know that I have reached out to Ms. Douglas, and she was the one that helped me write that. So, but we will get back in touch with you.
Thank you.
It's Dr. Douglas, sorry.
All right. Mark Briggs. Good evening.
Good evening. Mark
evening, Mark.
Briggs, 1337 Carlton Views is where I basically almost lost my life due to the damages. I do have pictures of some of the damages at Carlton Views. The damages consist of cracked foundations, mold, water damage, mildew, pipes busting, plumbing bad, no maintenance for a year or two. You got babies and kids over there. You got elderly over there. I tried talking to management over there. They gave me a hard time. I haven't done anything wrong. I've been trying to talk to them in a positive manner. I'm just praying that the place can get fixed, but they not actually trying to fix the place. It's a lot of other things going on over there also, but I think the main important thing is to try to come together and try to resolve the matter and fixing the place. But I think it's going to take a lot of work. If not, then they need to either get the people out of there, put them somewhere, fix the place, and move them back. So I'm praying that something like that comes available sooner or later, but that place is a mess, you know, especially when people almost losing their lives. I've been living like this. This is my fourth move. I moved there praying that I wouldn't have to move again. It was a brand new facility. That's why I moved there. And I really liked my apartment. But like I said, the management over there, they're giving me a hard time. I've been homeless over, 2 months now? They didn't even put me in a hotel room. I didn't deserve that. So I'm praying that something can be resolved in a positive way. Thanks.
And you are out of your apartment because they're repairing? Why are you out of your apartment?
I'm out of the apartment because I'm under doctor's care. I'm a cancer patient, and I can't live in there. Almost died.
Because of the mold, right?
The mold, the water damage, the mildew.
Right.
I mean, it's bad over there.
Right. I mean, this is something that, Mayor Walker and I have discussed on different occasions. I know you and I have communicated several times, and I know we're going to have a further discussion about it later on tonight, Carlton Views specifically, but I think it's important for when our constituents in the community as a whole say that, well, we want more affordable housing, and this is what needs to happen. We need to move forward with more apartments like Carlton Views. We have people who live there who have been telling us for months, and even when we go and visit, that essentially by some people's standards, the building is absent of management. The landlords have essentially just removed themselves from the situation. Now they're under new management now, but still we have people like yourself, Mark, who are living there who are continuously having these issues. So I think, again, for the community, before we jump to conclusions and say, like, let's move forward, let's get more housing, this looks like a perfect plan, let's talk to the people who live there, because everything on the surface isn't always how it seems on the inside. Thank you, Mark.
And that's important. You want, people deserve quality housing.
Right.
They deserve housing that doesn't, and we know this from what the discussions that when we're having them about other public housing sites
Right.
too, where, kids are dealing with asthma issues because of, the mold, like West Haven, that's been a constant complaint. And we know from the health department reports that that's an issue. So it's important to build, but I remember something that has stayed on my mind since our CIP meeting is our finance director talking about Venable and basically how we haven't had to spend many dollars since it's been built to maintain it. And those are the kind of buildings that we need to build. It may cost more upfront. Quality construction, everyone deserves that. And so it's not just throwing some buildings up and putting people in it, which is why I didn't support the funding, the allocation of the 1.4 million. But it's important not only to build affordable housing, but affordable housing that people can be, healthy and safe and secure in. And we can't miss that part of it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
All right, Jordan McNeish.
Hello, Mayor, Council. I've
evening.
lived in or around Charlottesville for my whole life. Last time I came to a council meeting was in 2012. A group of activists and myself encouraged council to pass a resolution that would ask the General Assembly to re-examine marijuana penalties. 2017, they actually repealed a law that required anyone who was arrested with marijuana to have their license suspended. There was some talk then that that wasn't the kind of thing council should be focused on, but I want to say thank you. It might have been part of what made a difference there. The reason I'm here today is to talk about harm reduction. Harm reduction is the philosophy that despite our best efforts, people continue to struggle with addiction. And it's a community's responsibility to do what it can to minimize the harm drug addiction will cause. Typically, this is a two-pronged approach, providing access to naloxone, which reverses an opiate overdose, and providing access to sterile syringes. This year, some friends and I co-founded Jefferson Area Harm Reduction. We've been working with the Charlottesville Health Department to distribute naloxone to users, and I can say for myself that naloxone has personally saved my life. The impact we've been able to have is limited because addicts don't tend to want to advertise themselves. Some people have reached out to us and they've expressed some fear that in doing so. So there's a little bit of access to naloxone. I think once a month they do a training so new patients can come in there. But Charlottesville currently has no mechanism to provide people with access to sterile syringes. Users, because of this, will inevitably end up sharing syringes. I've seen people try to sterilize them themselves. This is a terrible health practice, and obviously it leads to increased transmission rates for hepatitis and HIV. I'm speaking from personal experience here. I contracted hepatitis myself, and I had it for 3 years. I've always wanted to do a harm reduction, but I was scared when I was a user because I don't want to put myself in public scrutiny knowing that it would draw attention to myself. UVA, their financial assistance program accepted me, and they gave me a treatment for hepatitis. I cleared it, no longer have it. That was a $90,000 treatment, and that money came from somewhere, I don't know where. The city of Richmond recently opened the state's first syringe exchange, and they also provide naloxone. They can safely dispose of used syringes, provide access to clean syringes, and obviously naloxone, which Charlottesville does have limited access to naloxone, but none to clean syringes. A lot of you might think that Charlottesville is not like Richmond, but anecdotally I can say that that's wrong. I've had 3 friends that are from the area overdose and die. I myself have been resuscitated, and naloxone saved my life. There was some concern about the marijuana resolution that it sent a bad message to kids, that it would endorse drug use somehow. I'm worried that there might be concern about that in this case, but I think that creation of a harm reduction program would just show our kids and community that we care for the least among us. My friend came with me in 2012 to talk about the marijuana resolution. We were both nervous. We didn't want to do it, but we felt like we had to. I know he would be here with me today, but he has died from an overdose, so he can't make it. Thanks.
Thank you. So, Mr. Murphy, is this something that we can discuss during our work session, the behavioral health work session?
Yeah, that's a great idea, Mayor Walker. And also, coincidentally, the first of the reviews of the MAP report begin tomorrow. And so since I'll be with lots of public health officials tomorrow morning at 8:30, I will raise this issue with those folks. I know that there has been discussion in the Mental Health and Wellness Coalition in the past, and differences in philosophy over time from the Community Service Board and other providers about whether substance abuse treatment was best done through abstinence or harm reduction. But I think it's, in my opinion, harm reduction is an important part of the puzzle, and we can definitely pursue this.
So, Mayor Walker, we talked about this 2.5 years ago. I know when I first got on council, we were having roundtable discussions and just talks about not only syringe exchanges, but harm reduce policies or different methods that we could take. And there wasn't necessarily the political appetite for going that route. I hope that after hearing this testimony, and we've seen an increase in the amount of activity, or even just the amount of activity that we currently have in our community, I hope that we can revisit this during one of our work sessions. I, for one, would be very open to us looking at different ways in which we can have a syringe exchange program here within our community. The whole notion in regards to that this may send the wrong message to children, as was the discussion when we're talking about marijuana, and even with the initial conversation around heroin and other drugs, to me, I think is a fallacy. And if we want to be serious about helping the least of these, at the very minimum we need to do is the syringe exchange program. There's other communities across the country who have different zones. Ithaca, New York, they have the Ithaca plan. Seattle has a specific zone in which they allow individuals to come in there supervised. They have supervised injection sites to ensure that people don't overdose and there's no one there to be with them, but they also give them treatment on the spot, different counseling to kind of help them weigh their way off of the drugs. These are conversations I think we need to have, and I would be in full support. And I just want to tell you, man, your comments tonight mean a whole lot. Continue to stay strong, and you've changed a whole lot of people's minds who are watching and elsewhere. So you're brave and a hero. So thank you, man.
Yeah, and I agree. I'll say, a lot of people, they have an idea of what addiction looks like, right? Even when it's sitting, right beside them. They still can blank out the reality of it if it's their family member or their kids, even if you're talking about individuals who have, the privilege of, even wealth, and not being targeted by law enforcement as, like the, Black and Latino community during the crack cocaine, epidemic. But it's very, when I worked at Region 10 as a substance abuse clinician for 5 years, you see people, you get to know them. They are amazing. People talk about it being a choice. And most people don't understand it may have been a choice your first time or maybe even your second time, but at some point very closely after that, for a lot of people, it is no longer, a choice, and people, miss that. I've had a family member pass away from liver cancer because of a hepatitis, and so I totally understand, with not having access to that treatment. And it doesn't promote drug use. It gives people the opportunity to let them know that the community cares, to give them, the space for them to keep trying until they get it right. And, most people don't know how to support people through that time. And even if you don't want the help at that moment, or not open at that moment, it's not because you're not open. And that's what I think people, just miss, that you just need the space to stay healthy until you can make a different decision. So I totally support it. I've seen it. We need it for every aspect. And even when we talk about not just the, what you're talking about today, like the syringe exchanges, but we need to talk about, while, we are still prosecuting people for low-level marijuana offenses, while we're still, giving people the, instead of giving them assistance with DUIs, there's a whole host of, things that we are still doing in this community that we need to police and prosecute very differently than we are. So hopefully we'll come up with a better solution than we currently have.
Excuse me, Mayor Walker, I have a question for Mr. Murphy. Mr. Murphy, at the behavioral work session, would it be possible to have model ordinances and resolutions that we would need to enact an action on this topic for both the syringe exchange as well as the naloxone? I think we already have the latter, but I want to make sure that we're prepared to have the tools in place, that we know what they look like in order to be able to adopt the proper mechanisms.
Well, I think
Being that that's a total of only 9 days away, I don't
Okay.
know that I can make that commitment to you, but we will get something together
Okay.
quickly for your consideration.
And it's not a conversation just amongst us. We have to make sure that our police department is on board, because that, even if we create these, areas, if people don't feel safe, they won't go to them, right? And if the police are policing those areas, or finding out who's there and following or whatever, that creates an issue too. So we just need to make sure that as a community, before we promise anything, that we are on board from, every aspect of, our systems.
Mayor Walker. Just to add on to my colleagues' comments, I want to thank you for your bravery also. I think that there has been, as Mayor Walker pointed out rightly, a tremendous amount of discrimination in the policies that we've had, but addiction and mental illness don't discriminate, and they apply throughout humanity. And at least in this area, you have seen some progress toward introducing therapeutic models within our system. So the drug docket that we have and the mental health docket, we just graduated, I think, the first recipient to the mental health docket last week. That is a real good thing that we've done here. And regardless of how the problem is humanized, and I think Mayor Walker pointed out rightly, there's been a ton of discrimination in that. It is good to humanize it across everyone and to introduce more understanding in the way that we deal with what have been regarded as crimes. And all of our families have been touched by addiction. I mean, everybody, mine has deeply. And so we can all relate to the stories that we hear. So thank you. And I support us working on this also.
All right,
So I know-
Morgan.
I'm sorry, one more thing, Mayor Walker. So, Mr. Murphy, I know that the coalition has already done a great deal of preliminary work. Because the work session is indeed 9 days out, but is it possible to possibly add them to the agenda in some regards to figure out what would be the initial steps specifically for a syringe exchange program?
Yeah, so the behavioral health work session has been designed very much like the council work session on Second Chance Cities. So I know that while there was maybe some energy initially behind this after some discussion about the Community Services Board, they are one of many presenters that night, including the coalition and some peer resources. And so I think that we have the right folks in the room, and there is a real blend of different sizes and types of behavioral health resources. So Ms. Dimick is watching us on TV in my office right now, and she's organizing that. And I feel confident that we'll have the right folks for next Wednesday night.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Bless you.
Morgan Hopkins. Good evening.
I'm Morgan, and I live out in Scottsville, but I'm familiar with the community around here. I'm the co-founder of the Jefferson Area Harm Reduction. We've been able to provide limited amounts of naloxone, but have not been able to fulfill the needs of users who need sterile syringes. I'm clean now, but contracted Hep C when I was still using. UVA cured me for free, but the 90 gram was pretty expensive, and it came from somewhere. Could have been avoided if I had clean syringes as well. My sister was a user, and as a result, she passed away 2 years ago from an overdose, and I think it could have been prevented with naloxone. I feel like our community should follow Richmond's lead by opening a syringe exchange serving Charlottesville by providing clean syringes and naloxone. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. And on the Noxon, currently our first aid as well as first responders, they all carry the Noxon, correct?
Yeah, as I recall, and I'd need to double check with Chief Brackney, but the approach last we spoke about this was that EMS and police were co-responding so often that we felt like that being with fire and ambulances was adequate, and we weren't going to equip and train all police officers with the drug. And I believe that remains the case today, but I need to double check with law enforcement on it.
I would be interested. I know, and I've traveled to NLC, National League of Cities conferences. There's been discussions as well as breakout sessions in regards to NARLOC and all kinds of different resuscitation methods to be able to help individuals. And there's a variety of different grants throughout the nation to be able to help localities purchase these resuscitation methods. So if I would be interested in knowing how much it would cost for us to train all of our officers and equip them all with the necessary tools to be able to help individuals in need upon arrival.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story as well, young lady. Did a great job.
So we have Alfred Alley. Peter.
Good evening. I'm Peter Krebs, Piedmont Environmental Council and Charlottesville resident.
Good evening.
I have two quick things for you guys tonight. Both of them are thank yous. First of all, I want to thank you and the Board of Supervisors for the arrangement that I've heard about with respect to the courthouse. Can we talk about that? Yeah. So that's a really, really big deal. That's a good deal for the environment. It preserves both the rural areas of the county as well as the historic character of Charlottesville. It's a shared win for the city and the county. After all, we're just one community and we live together. This should be shared as well. And most of all, this is very good for the fair administration of justice. So thank you. Bravo. It's a really good news. We're so happy to hear about this. I'd also like to thank the city of Charlottesville as well as UVA School of Architecture, the CACF, the Planning District, the Move to Health Coalition, and PC's members for supporting the visit of Charles Brown last week. We had nearly 200 people take part in very honest discussions over the course of 2 days, both at the Jefferson School, at the Boys and Girls Club, and actually in the community about what it takes to have a safe, healthy, and equitable community. We talked about root causes and hidden histories. We talked about displacement, which is not always an economic question, often is, but it also can be about being welcome or not welcome in one's own community. We talked about designing spaces for those who will use them and really listening to those people. Among many other things, we talked about this, but most of all, it was about meeting people where they are and finding out what they need, and then working as advocates to deliver it to them. So lots more to dig into there, and it would take more than 3 minutes. I also think it's important to recognize that Charles learned a lot from our residents and our community. And I might go so far as to say that he was actually changed by many of the things that he's heard and grown as a human being. And that's what it's all about, right, is growing together. We're not done with Charles. The dialogue and the conversations will continue. We'll figure out some kind of way to bring him back or keep it going somehow. But I wanted to just say right away, thank you, and that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Good job last week.
Nancy Carpenter.
Good evening. My name is Nancy Carpenter. I don't have any specific asks for this particular 3 minutes, but just some observations. I do support what previous speakers have said in reference to the Carlton Views PUD rezoning that you'll be looking at later. I think that it is very important to understand that you speak for other low-income tenants that do not have any type of representation between government and redevelopment and whatever. I think it's very important that some of the folks that have lived there have come and spoke to you about some of the issues with the current building, and also the fact that you've been sold a pig and a poke before when it comes to, maybe a 5,000 square foot grocery store. I seem to have heard of similar ideas on the structures that were built on West Main Street with their street level entrances, and none of that really, came about. The other things that I want to say is we have a situation where someone is being held accountable for his actions last summer, a couple of blocks away, and I think there's a lot of accountability here on this council that also needs to be reminded that I understand that not many council members have sat in support of those individuals who are recounting testimony. Witness testimony to me is more powerful than what I've seen in a documentary where other people are making money off other people's pain here in this community, or anything else that has been going on. And to know that you all made a decision, not everybody on this sitting council, but there was a decision made that resulted in the fact that 3 people are no longer, walking on this side of Earth. And that everything that the activists came and spoke about and said that was in, social media is exactly the type of information that's being shared in the Commonwealth's prosecution. So I'm really just upset and sad that as of now, none of you all have gone to sit with survivors and other support. You could at least do that. I don't think you all adequately apologized to the community last year, and I think that right now I feel like there's a tone deafness of what's going on. I think all the testimony has been impactful, but I think when I hear someone say over and over again, I just didn't get out of the way fast enough. That person got out of the way fast enough because that person is still here to be with their family. And I just hope that you all will see fit at some point to, even if it's just 30 minutes, to go and sit with those folks that took it upon themselves, that knew what kind of bastards were coming to this community and stood up and protected us, whether it was the clergy or whether it was other folks from out of town who knew. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll just add, I think I can, that I don't plan on going. Haven't been. I didn't go to the screening. I only made it through about 15 minutes of it in my house by myself. I don't need a reminder because I was there. And it's something, and I've said it in every interview that people have attempted to get me to discuss it, that it's not something that I've fully processed yet. So I hope that people can respect that, but it's not something that I plan on doing. All right.
I don't. Yeah, this. I talk to Marissa, Courtney, Marcus often. I'm not. Yeah. Honestly, being in the courtroom is.
Are you?
That's it. That's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not about it being hard, Katrina. I'm telling you from a personal stand, I would have been right in front. I was on 4th Street before anyone else was on 4th Street. I'm telling you, for me, it is not something that I can deal with, and I'm just saying it openly. I understand we're different people, so okay. And I understand. And for people who I've, been attempting to reach out to people and just let them know that I'm thinking about them. But for me, it is not something that, people ask me where was I during the screening. I didn't go. It's not something that I want to deal with publicly yet. And so that is, I just wanted to, since Nancy brought it up, just say it publicly instead of being quiet, which I would have preferred to do, to not let people know that it's something that to this day I still cannot handle. Kat, Mayor.
What a rich evening of community events in Twining. Mayor Walker and Council. It's so interesting because tonight I was going to come and I was going to represent some clients of mine that I've been working with in Carlton Views who don't have access and weren't able to come for their public health and their health. And interestingly enough, I went and I did a house visit for somebody who's really dealing with addiction and didn't feel safe to come to the facility I was working at or others. So made a house call. So I just think it's really interesting how it's all dovetailing. And while I was in there, I noticed one of the reasons the family members were so ill was the black mold. And so I started asking neighbors and looking around and realizing what this gentleman has said, that this area is really rife with public health issues. So since that's been already addressed, my favorite song is about zoning, and it's moving away from traffic and more towards the environment and public health and the environment. And so I know that people are realizing you all are taking this really seriously, that you're starting to look at zoning, you're starting to be very conscious of how this city moves forward, and therefore there's this plethora of special use permits and changing zoning is coming in front of you. And Belmont right now at the Methodist Church, they're trying to appeal to the neighborhood to change zoning from residential. And so it's kind of hard, it's not real popular to be against special needs housing, but it's really another condominium. It's another apartment complex in many ways. So what my plea would be, looking at this housing, of course we need affordable housing, but to also, as a council, there's wisdom on a council, and to go forward with vision, going slow, really looking at the bids that are coming in for the affordable housing. Are these buildings of integrity? Have they gone through everything that needs to happen for these people to have a really healthy home? Because it's just adding to obviously the needs and greater services of the community. So I really ask that all these people that are coming forward asking for rezoning, we wait and we see the impact of all the by right developments that are about to take hold of this city. And so that we put a freeze in a way on any changing to zoning because it was made before your times in the Depression was 2008. It was how are we going to increase development? So that we deal with by right and we sit with it and that we really take our time before going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Walt Heineke.
Mayor Walker, members of council, thanks for the chance to speak tonight. How is everyone? Hope everyone's good. I too want to acknowledge the fact that we're only about 18 months out of a major tragedy in this city, and that there are people in this city right now as a result of this trial in town who are having to relive that pain and that suffering. Heather's mother's having to relive it. The folks that were hurt and maimed by the car are having to relive it. And I think collectively as a community we're having to relive it. And I just wanted to acknowledge that it's a really painful time for I think all of you sitting up there and for folks sitting behind me and folks in the city. And yet after 18 months we're still left with the question oftentimes of like what did it mean? And where do we go from here? And I think when I ask myself that question almost every day now, and it always comes back to one thing, that to me it seemed like the entire event and the episode was about us challenging white supremacy and uprooting institutional racism in our city as an example for the rest of the country. And I'm just hoping that at 18 months out, we're not, and in the rear view, we're not losing that perspective about what our role is here for the country and for our city, both outside and inside the city. And along those lines, I think about how to translate that into policy. And I do want to commend the council. I went to the work session on affordable housing, and I do have to say that the commitment that you all have made to affordable housing in this city is tremendous. What I saw at that meeting was a tremendous commitment of intention to address what we went through in terms of institutional racism and white supremacy in a very concrete way. That and contributions like from the Dave Matthews Band and Corin Capshaw are an indication that folks in this city are starting to take seriously their responsibility for challenging white supremacy and institutional racism in this town. So I do want to commend you for that commitment, and I hope to see that commitment come to fruition in this city. The mayor said at that meeting something that I thought was really, really important. There's a lot of asks being made right now in terms of affordable housing. There's going to be a lot of prioritizing that's going to have to come as a result of it. It's clear. And I just want to reiterate and ask you to think about prioritizing those at 30% of the average mean income in Charlottesville as your first priority for the way that you prioritize spending money, raising money, and spending money on this. It's those folks who are in the greatest need in our community, and it's those folks if you can serve, I think will be a very, very important signal to the rest of the country. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have Joan Fenton.
I'm Joan Fenton. I live in the county. I'm chair of the Downtown Business Association. I'm going to try to speak quickly because during this meeting there's several things that have occurred to me. I wholeheartedly support the needle exchange, but there's also something that you may not be aware of. There's an association called NADA that works to train emergency responders to do ear acupuncture, which can get you through withdrawal. So they're a national organization that's working with people who are in jails, first responders, to train them on how to get somebody. So besides just giving them medication and counseling, this also alleviates the withdrawal symptoms. And I believe there has to be enabling legislation through the state to get that to happen, but I have all the contact info. I have all the info on it if somebody's interested
Is the
in
health
that.
department still doing the ear acupuncture? They used to do it one day a week.
Yeah, but
They
this,
are?
this is to make
Okay.
sure that everybody gets trained.
No,
So when
right.
somebody's going through withdrawal, even if you don't do, it's, the idea is that even, that you don't consider it acupuncture, so therefore you don't have to be a licensed acupuncturist to do it.
Okay.
Second thing I wanted to mention is DBAC has put together a coat drive for kids in the city and county schools. So we're collecting coats at the city garages and at the Violet Crown and also at my pop-up store. But if anybody has new or gently used coats, we would love to have them donated. Kids can't go to recess without the coats if they're not warm. And then finally, I really did want to thank you for the money that you gave for the marketing downtown. I know that it was controversial, it was difficult, but I think we had a great success with it. And as a result of the city partnering with us, one of the things that's happened is we were able to raise money to put the lights on the entire mall. And if you remember last year, it was totally dark except for at the Christmas tree. And then DBAC put up some money to just put some lights on some poles. This year we were able to light the entire mall. And I think because the city supported us in our marketing campaign, because we had the new website and all of that, we then could say to people who were waiting for the city to take a lead that now we can do something. And we're hoping to get lighting on the mall year-round, but this is for the holidays. But if you haven't been out and walked the mall, it's spectacular. It's a whole lot different from what it's ever been. The tree is great, it's beautiful, but we think it's something that everybody can enjoy. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
All right, thanks. So Mary Carey's still not here. Louis Schultz.
My name is Louis Schultz. I live at 1809 East Market Street. There's been a lot of talk among councilors and the public lately about the Dillon Rule and the limits it places on council's power to do some of what it would like to do. In a nutshell, the Dillon Rule means that if the General Assembly hasn't specifically granted a power to a locality, the locality does not have and therefore can't exercise that power. Power can be granted to localities in two ways, either through special laws like charters, which apply to a single locality, or through widely applicable general laws. Later this evening, a public hearing is scheduled on the city's charter precisely because of those limitations. It is 100% clear that council and its attorneys acknowledge that council has no power to do certain things. In addition to grants of power, the General Assembly can also use either general laws or special laws to explicitly restrict localities from taking certain actions. One example of a specific limitation is subsection A of section 15.2-1503 of the Code of Virginia, which says, and I'm quoting, "All appointments of officers and hiring of other employees by a locality shall be without definite term unless for temporary services not to exceed 1 year." It should be self-evident that a clear restriction of council's authority carries even more weight than a mere lack of authority does. Section 1-248 of the Code of Virginia makes that explicit by saying that anything a governing body does shall not be inconsistent with the laws of the Commonwealth. A question to consider tonight is what to do when council knows it has done something that it is forbidden by law from doing. The employment agreement that the city has with the Chief of Police, Rochelle Brackney, is for a definite term that ends on December 31st, 2023, a period that clearly exceeds 1 year. That can't possibly be a valid contract since the city is prohibited by law from entering into employment contracts for definite terms of more than 1 year. The current 18-month employment contract that the city has with former Chief Al Thomas is even more problematic. It violates section 15.2-1503, and the city has refused to release that employment contract, even though 2.2-3705.1.1 of Virginia's Freedom of Information Act explicitly states that the city can't do that. Mike Murphy's contract appoints him as interim city manager for a term of 1 year and 1 day, and also makes it impossible to fire him for a definite term of several years after that, despite council having no power to agree to either. Compounding the problems with Mr. Murphy's employment agreement is the fact that Maurice Jones's contract doesn't end until December 6th. Council never agreed to its early termination. I can say with 100% certainty that, like council, City Attorney John Blair is aware of all of these issues, so I'd like to know what he personally has done to address them. Also, Mayor Walker said on The Schilling Show on October 3rd she now knows that the severance payments made to Maurice Jones were made in error. So I'd like Mr. Blair, or perhaps the city's treasurer, to explain what has been done to recover that money, and I'd like to know if the people responsible for making all of these and many more serious mistakes are still employed by the city attorney's office.
All right, thank you. Okay, and so we have 3 slots remaining. Is there anyone who would like to speak?
Hello, City Council. My name is Brad Slocum. I'm a city resident. I'd just like to follow up on the lengthy discussions on climate change and the city's reaction to that from the previous meeting. Not many people stayed till later in the evening for the actual report from city officials whose jobs it is to work on these climate issues and present to the city. Although the presented timeline for city action on drawing up a plan and what are meeting our commitments to the global compacts that we're parts of, was pretty straightforward. Nothing was, at least as far as I could tell, definitely described as to our vulnerability assessment. So the timeline seemed focused on greenhouse gas emission reductions, which is very critical. But additionally, as other people have mentioned, we're basically baked in already for significant disasters around the world, and based on my review of the regional hazard mitigation plan drawn up by the Thomas Jefferson Planning District, we're at pretty significant risk for things like landslides. Obviously, heavy winds and flooding have affected our area and already claimed lives just in the past year. So those things, the alarm bell, alarmist kind of stuff definitely gets old, but I haven't heard from the city how we're going to deal with the increasing amounts of natural disasters that are going to affect us, and also how those disasters are going to affect our society. I just read today that the World Bank expects that by 2050, there will be 140 million more refugees around the world. And we know that we have vulnerable coastal regions, Hampton Roads, those areas flood all the time now. It's just going to get worse. So I'd really like you to continue to give attention to the vulnerability and risk assessment portion of our climate plan and not just greenhouse gas reduction. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Now, I wasn't going to speak, but something been on my mind. And because, I look at the news, I keep up with everything. I try to anyway. They were talking about, I might be wrong, but y'all correct me, about expanding Garrett Square, Friendship Court.
The redevelopment.
Redeveloping. That means they're going to take the playground for the children and the garden?
No, well, they are planning on building, and there's a new playground that's in that development in the center of it. But they are going to build first on the area where the garden and where the green space that's in the back.
Okay, guys, I didn't hear all of it. When I got to it, it was some things that already been said. And what about the garden? They're going to let them keep their garden?
I think there are some plans to still have some areas and maybe rooftops. Is that?
Yes, Mayor Walker, if I may. So thank you for bringing that up. And the reason why the redevelopment plan has to build on the current garden and the green space is because a priority for the residents was no displacement. So if you think it's like a checkerboard, right? They've got to build on one corner of the land, and then they'll move residents into the new building, and then they'll keep moving that way. But they're going to be keeping green, like a strip of green space, all on top of the underground culvert, which is concealing Pollock's Branch. And then in the center, just like Mayor Walker said, there's going to be a large park about the size, at least the size of what is now East Market Park, where the Lee statue is, to give you a sense of the size.
Right.
And that there's going to be children's play areas, and there's a real drive to have garden space. Whether it's on the ground or whether it's on the roof, it remains to be seen, but the residents are committed to keeping the garden space. They
Good.
know they need
'Cause I'm like, we
the fresh
trying
food.
to-
The fresh food
We
is
wanna
really
keep-
important.
We know we're trying to make people understand about being healthy, and that's a wonderful
Yes.
idea. I was worried about that. Now, one more thing, I always brainstorm about making money for the city. My son lives in Ohio. They took an old building, big building, and made an arcade. It was beautiful, and that week I was there, in the summer, it stayed full. Now, because we don't really have a lot for these children to do. Now, you can only go swimming but a couple months out of a year. So we got to be thinking about all these children coming here. They need to do something. I mean, they took the skating ring, ice skating ring. I thought that was an awesome idea. I can't ice skate, but the kids loved it. So we got to, when these buildings come up, can't you kind of think about it? And I can show you some pictures if you want to know what it looks like in Ohio. They took a big building and honey, they made some money. They making money. I mean, on special weekends and school is out.
Thank you.
Think about.
Yep, thank you. We definitely need activities for,
Yeah, children.
yeah, we do.
My kids was coming up, they had places,
Mhm.
you know? All of a sudden, all those places have gone.
All right, thank you. Okay, we have one more slot.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Ben Baker. I'm a current UVA student and have lived in Charlottesville my entire life. It's no secret that one of the biggest challenges facing the city is figuring out our growth. I've been fascinated by the question, as Charlottesville expands not in just the next few years, but in the next several decades, what kind of city do we want to be? And I know that your vision is the same as mine. We want to be a city where people can live prosperously. In order for that to happen, though, Charlottesville needs to be a city where people can afford to live at all. How can we consider ourselves progressive and welcoming if low-income residents, people of color, students, and the middle class can't afford housing in the city? In the coming months, as Charlottesville modifies and affirms the draft of the comprehensive plan, I hope the council members think seriously about all of the issues that affect this central question. You've been entrusted with the powerful tool of setting the region's housing and zoning policy. I hope that, to the best and most daring of your ability, you use these tools for progress. The housing needs assessment clearly shows that the pathway to lowering the pricing of housing is to allow people to develop more of it. We should be a city that says yes in our backyards. We should allow for greater density, greater height allowances, and smaller parking requirements. Solutions should not focus on protecting the land value of privileged owners, but on enabling future and current residents to take part in that community ownership. If our housing does not include a missing middle, there will be no mystery when there is a missing middle class. Cities across the country have been following this exact model. They've been upzoning, removing parking requirements, and funneling millions into restoring the African American communities that have been so historically and intentionally harmed by our housing policies. We do not want to be behind the curve on such a central issue. We do not want political safety to get in the way of what is morally necessary. I'm not an expert. I'm not presenting you with ideas that you haven't already been ruminating with for years or decades. However, there are experts I hope you listen to. The City Planning Commission is staffed with excellent, thoughtful people, and I want to express my gratitude for the work that they've done. Not only is their technical knowledge impressive and their moral clarity admirable, they have been steadfast in their commitment to gather as much community input as possible. As you frame the city's budget to align with the comprehensive plan, I urge you to take their advice seriously, to take this need seriously. I'm speaking today simply to add my voice for those calling to not just tweak the zoning laws of the city, but to entirely rethink the way it goes about zoning. We can't add new streets, but we can use the streets we have more productively. We can't add more blocks, but we can use those blocks more effectively. We as a city have an enormous opportunity to change the answer of who can live and participate in the Charlottesville community. It may be years before we have as great an opportunity again. There will be resistance, but anything worth doing is always difficult. I urge you not to view this issue as a trade-off between competing parties. It is not the suburbs versus the urbanites, not the existing residents versus future residents, not business owners versus tourists. When we allow Charlottesville to build, we create a city that is better for everyone. Charlottesville is a bold city. Let us be bold with our housing policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so that's the end of our first community matters, and we're going to take a break before our first public hearing. Was there any comments? Or, no? Okay, so 10 minutes? So, yeah. No, we're under 10 minutes.
It's me.
When does council meet? He's born October 1st, 1924. He's from me and Frank shared a birthday.
Yeah, I know that. Thank you for coming, Bill. Well, the thing is, the zoning can't be based on maintenance of a building. So that I got clarified.
I'm more of a Chick-fil-A down there right now.
I'm so sorry, but the Rocket Party.
Is this on? Is it on?
I think you're getting mighty close to that. Well, it's a baptism under fire. It is for everybody, but.
All right, we'll get started in about 30 seconds. It is. That's fine. I'm starting with or without you.
It's her time.
Public comment starts before, regular business starts before 8.
All right, I call this meeting back to order. Next on the agenda, we have the public hearing for the proposed city charter amendment on city council compensation. And Mr. Blair will present.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There was a robust discussion at your last meeting concerning a charter change that the mayor had made part of the council's legislative packet. After that discussion, there was a consensus not to try to tie council members' salaries in this charter proposal to the city manager's salary. However, there was still a desire among the councilors and the mayor to still look at a way forward to present a charter amendment to the General Assembly that would allow the city council and the mayor to earn a salary that's higher than what is currently established in state law. The proposal before you, part of it is modeled on the city of Alexandria, and I would direct your attention to the Section 5 that's in your packet. And in effect, what this says is that the councilors shall set their salary by ordinance. And that's modeled on Alexandria because when you look at other city charters throughout the Commonwealth, they have verbiage that says to the effect of the council will set its salary pursuant to the provisions of general law or state law, which in effect still ties them to the limits provided for in the Code of Virginia. This proposal allows you to set your salary. It does not include a provision that ties it to state law. I would also note that it states no salary increase for the mayor or councilors shall take effect until the first day of January following the next regularly scheduled general election of councilors. As explained in your memo, council in effect approved a salary increase in August of 2019. The increase would not become effective until January 1st of 2020 because there's an intervening city council election. However, if the council approved a salary increase in March of 2020, the salary increase would not become effective until January 1st, 2022, because there would need to still be another election for city councilors after the vote to increase the salary. And that soonest election, general election, would be November of 2021.
Are there any questions from council? Okay, so I'm going to open the public hearing. We have 3 individuals signed up, and then I'll ask if there's anyone else here to speak after. First, we have Paul Long.
Mayor Walker and members of the City Council, my name is Paul Long. I live at 100 Ridge Street here in the city, and I want the council to know that I'm totally opposed to the proposal for a pay increase right now. And I'm opposed for several reasons. What I would like the city council to do if they want to go to the General Assembly to change the charter is to work in terms of changing how the city is governed. I believe that in the last 2.5 years, the city has become dysfunctional. I think the events that happened in July and August of 2017 showed that the city manager was completely ineffective, as well as the chief of police and the members of the council who were serving at the time. I would like to propose that we elect our mayor, and with all deference to Mr. Murphy, do away with the city manager position and have a strong mayor who operates the city government on a day-to-day basis, prepares the city budget, and appoints all department heads who will serve at his or her pleasure. I would also like to see the city council expand from 5 members to 7, and I would like the city to be divided into 5 wards with 5 city council members elected from each ward and 2 city council members elected at large. And the reason I'm saying that is that in a 5 wards, you'd have approximately 6,000 to 6,500 voters in each ward, and it's a lot easier to campaign amongst 6,000 or 6,500 than it is to conduct a citywide election effort. We have to wait, and it would also be much more affordable. I think one of the big obstacles for people who are either working class or have limited financial means to serving in council is not necessarily the salary, but the exorbitant amounts of money that you have to raise to run for city council. In 2015, and the 3 members of city council were elected then, former Mayor Signer, Ms. Galvin, and Mr. Bellamy, raised a total of $77,000 for that campaign. I protested against that figure at the time, and Mayor Walker, you yourself raised $26,000, and I want to congratulate you for not accepting corporate money and for even in your ethical decision when you were given that $10,000 donation to check out the donor first to make sure that you weren't committing any conflict of interest. I think that was fortunate that it gave you the opportunity of doing television advertising in the campaign and perhaps helped lead to your election, which I supported. And so that's basically it. I think that and I'm also opposed to the way the city council, and not just this city council, but previous city councils as well, waste money. And I'm mentioning former police chief Al Thomas is getting $150,000 being paid for 18 months when he resigned, and the $80,000 loan that was forgiven with former city manager Maurice Jones. I wish the city council would give me $80,000, or give me $150,000. And I know that's not going to happen, but you have to be very, very careful how you spend money. I've been advocating for and I'll make this real quick, for a public transportation system for the last 9 years, and I'm constantly being told that the city doesn't have the money. And I see the figures that are being thrown around here, and for the amounts of money for outside consultants and the funds that are being paid for them, the city has the money to do that. It just wants to spend it in other areas. But thanks a lot. And if they do adopt my form of what I'm suggesting, I would definitely endorse you, Mayor Walker, to be a strong mayor and have you run the day-to-day operations of the city. Thanks a lot.
Marcia Geyer.
Mayor Walker, City Council, good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Marcia Geyer with a frog in my throat. I live on Pear Tree Lane in Charlottesville. It's really important that y'all's salaries compensate you for your hard work, and it's not happening yet. Compensate you in a reasonable way. So what is reasonable? I looked up the average salary in Charlottesville. The most recent data for employees of the city from August 2018 shows an average salary of $57,000. That's at payscale.com. Another source from the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank shows for the whole Charlottesville MSA average income of $49,570. That's also in May of this year. So I would suggest that this range from 49.5 to 57 should be the floor or the bottom the council considers for equitable salaries for itself, and that salaries be indexed to inflation when you do this, so you don't have to keep coming back and have it be, a controversial issue. I suggest that even if you have the staff you need, counselors will not cut your workload in half, as Counselor Galvin suggested. It takes time to review and think about what staff prepares for you. Even with more staff, if you got to 30 hours a week instead of 50. In practice, people who might want to serve on council would not be able to supplement their salary by working part-time, because unless you're own your own business at the top of the heap, or you're working for minimum wage at the bottom, there are no part-time jobs, very, very few. So you need this position to pay a living wage for living here in Charlottesville. Churches often set their pastor's salary as about the middle of the salaries of the congregation. They understand this is a service position, and there's kind of being on council is also a service position, so maybe trying to go in the middle is what council should think of doing. I hope you get the staff you need. That's really important. I know you can't pay attention to everything. It's impossible. You got too much just tonight.
Thank you.
Good luck with that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Walt Heineke.
Walt Heineke, Amherst Street. First, I wanted to say I totally support the idea that Mr. Long brought up about having a strong mayor and having an elected strong mayor. I think that's a really good idea. Secondly, the issue for me on this is about accessibility to governance. I think there are a lot of people who are really qualified in this city who might consider running for council but just don't have the means. They're working one job, two jobs part-time or whatever and don't have the means. So for me, part of this initiative, part of this idea makes a lot of sense in that it would open up folks running for council who would never dream of being able to do it if they were being paid a decent salary to do it. That being said, if it were me on council and I had the salary that I have now out in my job, I probably would not want to take an increase in salary. In other words, if I'm making $80,000, $150,000 a year, I don't think I need an increase from city council, from the city in terms of my salary for doing the work. That said, I think maybe an idea here is to ask for an increase, but I'm wondering if there's a way to index it to your all's salaries. Like if you're at a certain salary level, then you get you're eligible for the salary increase. And if you're at a higher level of income, you don't get the salary increase. I don't know if that's equitable or not, but it sure seems like it would make more sense to taxpayers. And it would also enable those who are thinking about running for council but would never, try it because of their income level. It would open up the opportunity for much more diversity, I think, in the perspectives that councilors bring when they take this job. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
My name is Louis Schultz. I live at 1809 East Market Street. While the publicity around tonight's public hearing and the entirety of Mr. Blair's introduction has focused on questions of council's pay, most of the proposed amendment actually has to do with changing the timing of city council elections to November of odd-numbered years from May of even-numbered years. There seems to be no dispute among council, its attorneys, the state's attorney general, or Virginia Supreme Court about the effect of the Dillon Rule or the need for the city to obey its charter and do as it prescribes. The whole premise of this hearing is that council can't legally do something that the General Assembly hasn't explicitly authorized it to do. There also seems to be agreement among council and its legal advisors that in order to have November council elections, the city is going to have its charter amended to allow that. It wouldn't be on the agenda tonight otherwise. That sets off all sorts of alarms since not a single person currently acting as a councilor ever ran or was elected in a May election. Everyone seems to agree that council couldn't possibly have had the authority in July of 2004 to move elections to November, when more than 14 years later, the charter amendment that would allow that hasn't yet gone to the General Assembly, let alone been approved. The ordinance that changed the election date acknowledges that it was done in violation of the charter, but attempts to excuse that by citing Virginia Code Section 24.2-222.1 as authority to make that change. The problem is that until 12 years later, when Senate Bill 43 of 2016 amended that section of code to say that it could be applied, quote, notwithstanding any contrary provisions of a city or town charter, it did not allow any locality to hold November elections, local elections, if its charter required otherwise. Case after case in Virginia's Supreme Court and numerous opinions of the Attorney General have reaffirmed the principle that a special law takes precedence over a general law that doesn't explicitly say that it should take precedence. In a July 2017 demurrer filed in the Lee statute case, the city's attorneys persuasively argue that in Virginia at least, courts have limited retroactive application to procedural or remedial legislation and not to substantive law. That is to say, the 2016 amendment could not have retroactively legalized Charlottesville's change to November elections in 2004. Article 7, Section 5 of Virginia's Constitution says that the governing body of each city shall be elected in the manner provided by law. Section 5A of the Charter defines Charlottesville City Council as being composed of members elected on the day prescribed for such elections by the laws of the state, whose terms of office shall begin and continue for such length of time as is prescribed by law. The General Assembly, under the authority granted to it by Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution, has prescribed by law that Charlottesville's council elections are to take place in May of even-numbered years for terms to begin and end in July. The group sitting as council tonight was not elected in the manner prescribed by law, and as such does not make up a governing body that meets either the Constitution's or the Charter's requirement. It is imperative that the group claiming to be this city's governing body immediately petition the court to resolve the apparent constitutional crisis that the proposed charter amendment has now exposed. It is unconscionable that it attempts something as drastic as seeking a charter amendment with that authority in question.
Do you have any comments about the compensation for council?
I'm talking about the amendment.
I know. And I would have you
amendment.
that Mr. Blair, we have talked about this since he came on and he brought it to the entire council, too, about our charter and updating it and getting a commission together with council members. So it is something that we're very aware that needs to be done. And that's not what we asked him to do when we had these proposed amendments, and when we got our, when he sent the amendments back to us, he had changed to submit the proper language, up-to-date language based on what is occurring today also in the amendment. So we...
I do not understand what you're telling me right now.
So, Mr. Blair, the edits that you're talking about,
Yes.
he made sure that they were done correctly, instead of just proposing the amendment change just to simply say compensation to give us the right to set compensation. He made sure he went through and made all the edits that needed to be made. So what I'm saying is that we are aware that our charter needs to be updated and that those updates needed to have been done a long time ago and that they haven't. Now,
But
to get to
you're
your
apparently not
point that
understanding
you,
what I'm
no, I
saying.
totally do, I don't, understand what you want us to do at this point.
I just said that. I think that.
I know what
because-
you said, but you're just letting us all know that we're illegal and shouldn't be here.
Well, I'm letting you know that the Constitution, that neither the Constitution nor the city charter, the whole question, the whole reason that we're having a meeting tonight, a discussion of this, is because you, the rest of council, the city attorney, and pretty much everybody else seems to agree that council cannot do what it hasn't been authorized to do by the General Assembly. Right? Council was never authorized at the time that the 2004 change to the law was made that moved elections from May to November.
We understand that.
We're not allowed to do that.
I hear what
So
you're saying.
neither you nor anybody else, first of all, as mayor, the law says that you had to be elected in July, and that didn't happen. You were elected in January.
You're right.
So there are real substantial questions
Or
about the
November,
legitimacy and the legal authority of this entire
We understand that
council.
that's what you're.
So what I'm saying is that you are attempting, this council is attempting, because it has been said to be necessary, to amend the city's charter. I'm questioning whether you or anyone else on this council, acting as this council, actually has the legal authority to do so.
I understand.
And I'm suggesting that the city attorney either ask for an official opinion from the attorney general on the subject or petition the court to declare the question null and void and to establish you as the actual council.
And we
Because
saw
it-
you over there talking, so you have that
yeah.
information. right?
At this
Okay.
point, it seems that this council has not been elected, does not meet the requirements of the charter, and is therefore constitutionally and under the terms of the charter not empowered to act in any way on behalf of this city. That's a question that needs to be answered. Do you not agree with that?
I just think just the bigger picture here that Richmond is just an hour or so away, and I think the General Assembly is aware when we've been holding elections since 2004. I get what you're saying.
So,
and-
but you're telling me then the law doesn't matter. But the whole
No, I'm not
premise of
telling
this
you that.
meeting
I'm
is
telling you
what the
that
charter
you-
requires the
and
city
you had
to
a
do.
conversation with Mr. Blair, and I am assuming that he will lead us in the right direction.
So does that mean that you're going to
Mayor
petition the
Walker.
courts to answer the question? or-
For the sake of the meeting
Yeah.
and others who maybe want to speak.
Yeah,
if we
I mean,
could move
but
forward.
so, are you telling me that the whole premise of tonight's meeting
No,
is that the city only has the authority that the charter has
That's not what
given
I'm telling
the
you.
city council?
I'm not, I've said what I'm going to say, and I've also talked to you privately
Yeah.
about this.
So you're telling me that you're unconcerned of what the law
I didn't tell
actually
you that.
says?
And I told you that before, that you should try to listen more and understand when people are making efforts. And you don't seem to do that well. And it would be helpful if you worked on that.
I'm totally confused at what you're trying to tell me, because I am telling you, I am
Okay.
a
Well,
citizen
thank you.
who has come here with a legitimate
And
question.
Mr. Blair, you
of-
have his concerns, and
Yes,
we.
but are they ever going to be answered? I mean, Mike Murphy comes up here and answers questions, but it's funny how he always omits answering the ones that I've raised, which are substantial questions about his legitimacy, your legitimacy, this entire council's legitimacy.
Thank you.
And they need to be answered.
You're
So
right.
will they be answered?
I agree, we're working on it.
But that's the kind of thing to brush off somebody that you don't
I'm not
actually.
trying to brush you off. Thank you.
You certainly are.
No, I'm not.
That's what I'm hearing.
All right, thank you. All right. Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
Sina McGill.
Good evening.
Good evening. I do agree with this. I think before it goes to General Assembly, there should be some sort of end cap, because I don't think the General Assembly will look at it otherwise. Because this will set a precedent in Virginia. If you look at the different areas that requesting that we are allowed to make our own choice of how much we're going to pay our counselors. I don't fully trust the General Assembly giving away that much power. I think it's a really great statement to make that we feel that the current amount is not a fair wage. And I think it does stop people who have not as flexible jobs or a significant other who makes a significant wage, it stops them from the ability to run. Because even if technically council's supposed to be 20 hours a week, it is not 20 hours a week. Even if it was, it is not 20 hours a week that is a set timetable. And when you're working a lot of types of jobs, I've worked plenty of jobs where you have to choose the one job that is your primary job, and the other jobs have to fit in around that job. And in order to do that, to survive, you need to be able to have a living wage. And I hope that, I thought maybe 50% AMI, since it would move consistently with the area and would reflect and if it's a 20-hour a week, 50% is 20 hours. If it shows later on that, hey, it's definitely more than 20 hours, we can prove that it's more than 20 hours, that can be adjusted. But even 50% AMI at least is a much closer to livable wage. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's a fascinating suggestion in regards to tying it to the AMI. Do we know what the, oh, sorry, what we?
Just want to.
Yeah, I'll wait.
Okay.
Sorry, I'll wait till she.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak? No? Okay, we're going to close the public hearing.
So,
all right, do we need a motion before the discussion?
I think it's up to the council. You
So
can have your
discussion.
discussion.
All right.
I would be interested in finding the dollar amount, or what is the 50% AMI as she just suggested for 20 hours a week. Do we know what that figure may be? Or is there a way for us to, I mean, obviously you wouldn't know right off the top of your head, Mr. Blair, or.
Right.
But I mean, if we could find that out, or do you know what's going on?
If I may say something, Mayor Walker, I think a big decision to make on the part of the council is whether the goal is to have this to be a part-time job or a full-time job, and that is a debatable point, because if your goal is to make this really a part-time job, because you believe in the notion that this isn't supposed to be a career political position, then you're going to be setting up your framework, including your relationship with your city manager and all your council staff, and your commitments to boards and commissions to make sure that it does stay part-time. That kind of a focus has never happened. It's just there's been scope creep endlessly in this job. So that's just one question. The next question is that, okay, if we're going to agree that this is to be a full-time job, then what? Then you got to get it to hourly rate. So there are a lot of decisions here that need to be made, and in one fell swoop, no matter what we decide, the General Assembly could shoot it down. So my thought is that the idea of just giving us the locality the latitude to make that change was actually conserving our time, our focus, and getting it before the General Assembly sooner versus later, so that we could be doing much more. Once we get that permission to do this change, then you could do a much more exhaustive review because I don't know about you, but I've been getting a lot of debate about this issue. It's not clear in the public. A lot of people want to make sure that this stays a citizen legislator.
Could I make a point of order? I think that Mayor Walker, you were correct that a motion should be on the floor before we get into full debate. That we need to even determine whether there's support for a motion, and then this debate would happen.
Mr. Blair said it was okay to talk.
And I think the reason that I said that was it still sounds like this is organic and no one's prepared to make a motion. You want to talk about your options before.
Yeah, I would like to discuss the options, and then even based on the options as it was described to a certain extent from Ms. Galvin, I think we all speak to different constituencies, and that's why we all are elected, and nobody has one set group in which we're supposed to talk to, and we kind of get a chance to reach and touch and speak to a variety of different people. I've actually heard from a lot of people quite the opposite. I haven't heard, and I know from my personal estimation, I don't think anyone intends for this to be a career position in which you're trying to be a city councilor for 20 years. God bless you if anyone would like to to do this for that amount of time. I mean, some will say even
Get through
4
the
years
four.
is 4 years is a good bit. However, I do think when we take into account the amount of work in which we put in, I don't think any of us can say that we only work 20 hours a week.
We all have agreed on that. I
Yeah,
mean, and
all
even
agree.
to say in the foreseeable future, and especially with how active
Our council is.
and the
And our community-
citizens
oh.
and the demands.
Yeah. I mean, I know this morning alone, I took 4 meetings at Seaville Coffee. I was there from 8 a.m. to 10:30 a.m., just meeting with constituents. I mean, and that's like, that's 3-4 times a week. I mean, that's all the time. And that's not even taking into account when you're researching, looking for policy. God forbid you want to actually come up with new ideas or talk and research other stuff. People, as it's been eloquently stated, people who don't have the kind of flexibilities in their jobs to do this right now are boxed out. And if we want to try to expand the scope of people who can actually be a city council and be actually true representatives of our community, we have to look at increasing the wages. If you, I don't get how we can get a different pool of people. I've seen some of the emails and people have said, well, I've been on council before. Some prior councilors have sent us emails and said they've been on council and served with a large majority of people. I'm just going to be very frank. This is the first time we've ever had 2 black people on city council. Nakai and I are the 7th and 8th persons of colors to ever be on the city council. That shows, that there in itself shows that there is a large population and segment of people who have been left out. And I'm not saying that we need to increase the wages just for black folk, but a person who I met with this morning, he's 60 some odd years old. He's on a fixed income. He's saying that his current life situation, he wouldn't be able to run for council, serve on council, and take care of himself. Like, he wouldn't be able to do it. We have to be able to make this a position in which is all inclusive for everyone. And that's why I'm also very interested in the Alexandria model, as well as, I think you're absolutely right. If we go to the General Assembly with what we're looking for specifically, they're more susceptible to hear us out and grant us the charter change than us just asking them, can you allow us to do it? And then we come up with it on our own. They're going to want to see what our plan is. And I'd like for us to discuss such.
I'm sorry, could I, with the fact, the question that Councilor Bellamy had asked, just looking at our income charts, for one person household, it says 80% AMI is 47.8. And doing the math, looks like that would be 59.7 for a full-time at 100% AMI. And so if you divided that by 2, I came up with 29,875 as about 20%. And again, these are numbers based on our own income guidelines for housing programs on our website. In terms of what 80% AMI is at 47.8. So I took a fourth of that and added it. Like I said, came up with 59,750 and then divided it by 2. At 29,875.
And I
So a
think,
couple-
go ahead.
Just a couple thoughts. So I think the way that I approach this is that I'm concerned about putting the cart before the horse. So we have had a lot of discussion about governmental reform in the city, about the way that the city council and the city council staff are designed. That has been happening alongside a serious discussion about the kind of city manager we want to have in the wake of one very specific kind of city management that happened over the last several years, where there was a discussion about a difficulty with implementation that I think there was pretty widespread agreement, which shifted a lot of work onto the councilors. We all spend a lot of time with different councils from around the state, I think around the country, and I know that in a lot of cities, it's your city council meetings move pretty quickly, and the city councilors' roles are not nearly as intensive because there's a lot more reliance on staff to get a lot of things done and make sure that when something comes to the city council meeting, it's ripe for a decision. Meanwhile, there was all this discussion under the prior regime about creating this very robust office for city council, including a chief of staff, a policy advisor, a communications advisor, and a deputy, I think. So 4 staff members. Then there's been a lot of discussion, including in this council, about whether that's appropriate, including the chief of staff position and so on. Ironically, that idea came from Roanoke because they've got that sort of same structure for the city council. Meanwhile, there were a lot of people who ran for this council last time around. I think there were 7 or 8 candidates. So it doesn't seem as if the way that it is right now is preventing people from being interested in running for council. And just another fact to throw in the mix is Alexandria is in the DC area, which is the most expensive metropolitan area in the country, I think. The median household income there is, I'm just looking right now, $89,200. So I would, my view is we get the city manager in place correctly. And that is the primary goal that's happening right now for the city in terms of how the whole government is functioning. And we focus on getting the council staff correct. I know that there's 2 different pieces here. How much are we paid and how much time are we putting in? A lot of it, when you have young kids and a very demanding job on the outside, which is my makeup, it is very hard to do a lot of the meetings that we're required to. And I'm very much looking for a discussion we're going to have about all the boards we sit on, and can we send a staff delegate or an alternate. I found out by surprise that the MPO, which both Councilor Galvin and I sit on, allows an alternate. I want to be able to send staff, once we have these staff in place, to have some protocols, because it is, and now because there's so much interest in this council, which I credit this council with, in doing a lot of extra stuff, but we are having virtually weekly work sessions. And the work sessions, when they go into the night, when you have young kids or family, they've been very, very hard. I had to leave at 9 o'clock last week because I've got 2 4-year-olds and my wife is on the job market, and a lot of other details that nobody would particularly care about, but it is really, all of us have our own makeups any day to day, and it is a part-time job. It is meant to be a part-time job. It's a citizen legislative form of government, just like our delegates and senators, just like the majority of states have. That is the design of the government. So we can tweak it, and they have in Alexandria, Fairfax, Arlington, some other localities, but that's a very serious discussion that does, to me, feel like the cart before the horse when we are getting a city manager in place with a very serious consensus that we want that to be an execution-focused city manager. So that's where I fall.
But I'm not sure, Mr. Signer, what the city manager decision in regards to who we elect, or excuse me, who we choose to be our new city manager has to do with the compensation of council, as well as how we're trying to potentially make this position or these positions more available for those in the community. And that's the first point. The second point, I would push back to a certain extent in regards to the last election. 6, 7 people, I don't think that's a significant amount of people when you think about you have nearly 50,000 people in the city and only 6 or 7 of them choose to run for office. I don't consider that to be a large amount of people who decided to run. And I think one barrier of it is the amount of time that we put in. And people say this all the time. You guys put so much time in. Mayor Walker did the calculations. It's like 11 cents an hour for the amount of work in which we've done. I know when you were mayor,
that's my point.
When you were mayor, you've done similar. I think you said it was like 40.
But that's one of the reasons that we were trying to set up the whole office. So,
but that's still assuming that if we...
Can I finish? Can I finish, please?
You all were talking back and forth.
Well, but
that's assuming that the staff would alleviate some of our workload. Because it's not something that's been worked out.
I just was trying to make the original
point. And you and Wes were talking back and forth, but every time I say something and you're saying it, so you can, again, adult.
We weren't interrupting
That would be helpful.
I forgot what I was going to say.
Wes, were you done?
We were just discussing in regards to the lack of compensation, right? And I was saying, Mayor Signer, when you were Mayor, Mr. Signer, when you were mayor as well, you were talking about, I think you came up with the calculation like 40 some odd.
Correct.
Or something and out. So I think that's a real part of what prohibits people. And I think your point that you were making, correct me if I'm wrong, you were speaking that we were creating these new policy positions were supposed to help us with that. But I don't know if that's going to deter us or stop us from still having community engagement meetings or people still wanting us to be responsive to a variety of things, or us as the actual policy makers, even if we have assistants, still saying that we want to write the policy, do the research, go where we have to go, and so forth. Like, we're still going to be putting in time.
Well, so Mr. Bellamy, my perception right now is that we are unintentionally creating this problem more than resolving it with the amount of work sessions, the amount of extra work that is happening in this council in the vacuum of having, I mean, the search for the city manager is going on right now. When we have this, like what we did the prior time, even to try to manage this, was we moved the work sessions into the into the Tuesday meeting. So now I get the impulse. I think it's a very noble impulse to do a lot, but it's happening while we're looking for the city manager who hopefully will change that whole calculation entirely. So we're not doing multiple evening work sessions that go on for 3 hours or 3.5 or 4 hours. That's not the design of the job. The design of the job is to have 2 meetings a month and then occasional other meetings. It's not meant to be, it's just not designed to be that way. And so we're ending having both debates. And at least this position I'm standing for is to put a break on that first one while we work at the second one. And then with the city manager, we could then decide to work on the first one, like we're talking about the hours, but it's just, but I get I totally understand the point.
No, I think too, also, I mean, to a certain extent, we're part to blame for that, because I think, I mean, if I'm being completely transparent, I think you and I, in our last council as a whole, I would say, kind of said that we're going to ramp up the amount of work in which we do, look at different policies, let's try to change this, change that, let's discuss these difficult issues that required a whole lot of work. I think the last council as a whole, we all committed to doing so. Even if we bring in new positions, I don't see how that's going to stop counselors from still saying, because to me, regardless if you have policy analysts or whomever, to do the job right, in my opinion, you're still going to have a great deal of engagement with people. That's going to be off-site meetings. That's going to be doing a ton of research. I mean, I don't know how, even with new positions, it's going to balance out.
Well, even before the council, before the previous council, those individuals were still working very hard. And I mean, I remember my conversations with Dr. Holly Edwards and the same, I mean, that pace, always being in meetings, always being contacted. And I think, I don't think anybody is disputing that whether we are working 50 hours or 20 hours right now, we are not being compensated properly. So I think it's just the discussion of whether, so at either, whether we were just at 20 or not, it's still not based on the amount of work that we do. So I think that's part of the discussion. I know the last meeting, what my comments, I was talking about that if you want people to be able to even consider whether right now I work for the city, I have to get coverage luckily, my director is very flexible with me. As long as my shift is covered, I can take off, but I am an hourly wage person also. So when I'm not at work, like the meeting that I'm not going to be able to be at tomorrow is at 8:30 in the morning. I do not have coverage for it, and I will be at work tomorrow at 8:30. So now we're back to that I'm going to be missing. Luckily, Mr. Murphy just said he'll be there, so I will be able to get, an update. But I think those are the type of things that council members, like people who don't have to consider those kind of aspects. If I'm not there, which you all know how often, and even in these last email exchanges that we've been doing about interviews, I have to weigh that I can't just leave. There's no vacation time, and the fact that there are so many other people in this community that have to deal with that type of thought process, then just I can take off. I have vacation as long as I get my work done. I still get paid the same, hourly wage. So there's a completely different population of people. And again, I've had several conversations. There's been tons of email, tons and tons of Facebook conversations surround that. And I mean, just for a personal note for me, I'm only in the financial position that I am in because I sacrificed myself for other people. I had a job before, I earned a salary, I had vacation time, and have worked in nonprofits throughout the city. But my activism for people that I worked for led me into my current position. So I've received comments from Work Harder. If you want a different job, to be able to have those kind of that kind of leave, then you should do something so you can have a better career. I mean, and so for me, this is telling still of the kind of community that that we live in and why we're facing the kind of issues that we're facing across the board. This General Assembly will probably deny this. So that's the reality of this. And then next year, when we meet earlier in the year, I plan to present this again. Because for me, it just makes it's worth the statement that this is important. But I think the debate that the community is having around it is more telling of where we are and why we're still in this place. That we are constantly talking about the racial aspect of things, but there is a major class division and a class divide, and people don't even know how to step out of their circumstance and see why something like this would be important. So for those people, I'm responding for myself. I have worked for nothing. And I will continue to do it. And I will continue to do this job at the current salary. And so I'm not going anywhere, and it's not going to hinder me. And so I think in terms of making sure that it's available and open and other people can wrap their minds around how to get something like this done is what we should also think about.
But what we're looking at right now is pretty open-ended, and I think that obviously the last 2 weeks ago it was tied to city manager's role, which I think a lot of us were uncomfortable with, and so I'm uncomfortable with just kind of giving it an open slate without having more definition behind it. And I also, my biggest focus, and I've started by I've asked Mr. Blair to look at all the boards and commissions we're on. I think there's just a lot we need to do to make this more manageable, regardless of the salaries, so that people can step into it. Because as we talked about, even if we were to set these AMIs, those are still not wages that alone people could live on if this was their only income. And once you're working this much, it's hard no matter what, unless we can really reduce the time commitment, we're not solving the problem, in my opinion. And I'm really struggling with this because as Mr. Heineke brought up, I actually brought up to a couple of my colleagues, and I even think to Mr. Blair, is it indexable? Because let's be honest, there are different means that different people have, and I'm just not sure what the legal ramifications are of that. I don't know I think we did talk about it briefly in your office.
We did. I think, again, you have to remember the General Assembly could look at that. Now, there's no other charter in the state that provides for indexing like that. I think there's also the question of, in effect, who would exactly, I think it would almost require you, to make this practical rather than theoretical. I know tax returns are a touchy issue and at different levels, but in effect, really what that would require is, in effect, to say, here is my income from the past year. If you were looking at a pure indexing system to income, you would have to know each counselor's income, verify it, and then index it based on their council salary based on their income that they receive otherwise.
So I think with that model, it's worth a shot, and I would be open even to your suggestion, Vice Mayor Hill, in regards to you're saying it's open. I think that, again, as we heard from the, ma'am, what's your name again? I'm sorry. Yes. Miss McGill, excuse me. So as we heard from Miss McGill, I think that we can't have it so open when we go and approach the General Assembly. We need to be rather specified in asking them the request, because if they think, I don't think they're just going to grant us, oh, hey, go figure it out on your own. So if there were two models, one, this AMI, which seems rather complex, but it's also innovative, that we'd be asking for, or we can ask them to allow us to adopt the Alexandria model.
But I think,
No, I was just saying, and that's where I'm just struggling, because this is kind of, we were a couple weeks ago, and that's why I asked for more time. I just, even for the two things we're looking at, I just think that this is a lot of detail that we would need to consider, and I recognize that we're going to bring it up again, even if it does pass tonight, that it may not likely be able to go through, but it is a part of a more robust conversation. Because the other aspect of this I'm really struggling with is the feedback I've gotten from some members of staff. When they look at counselors making more than them for what we should consider a part-time elected position, I think about they're a major stakeholder in this, and I think it's just important that we consider these numbers relative to, this is a lot more than many of our staff make, and obviously we're working on getting their wages to more closer to a living wage, and in many cases we're not there, but it's just something that I've heard from various staff members, and it has really kind of resonated with me in the last couple of weeks since this has been a conversation.
and I will say, as someone who has championed the living wage, even our discussion tonight about the surplus, my first conversation with Mr. Murphy was looking at employees who are not in the compression issue, or departments where there are major issues in pay, and see if we can allocate any of the surplus funding to. So and since I was the one that brought this up, my first thought, and as being an employee and hearing and seeing the effects of people not being paid well, I totally understand that. That still doesn't take into account, I mean, of this council, and I'm just going to say the level of work I know that you and I do together, right? It's insane. Okay, just insane.
And that's just
and
y'all
so,
like it's crazy.
And so it's constant, and it's not just looking at one thing per day. It's you're looking at multiple things and have to be very aware and knowledgeable of what's going on. It requires a ton of effort. So I think we're talking about like just a lot of different things. And again, back to, if this is passed, we still have another major layer to be granted permission to do it. And then at that point, what does it look like? And then we still have a time frame before it's even able, to take effect.
So Mayor Walker, if I may make a comment or a question to my colleagues. So then it does seem like then someone has to make an amendment to Mr. Blair's resolution tonight to put more definition. I don't know, is anyone ready for that? I'm not. I don't have a resolution in my head.
I'm not ready.
And so what we have before us tonight is an open-ended resolution, but to get the ball rolling and bring it before the General Assembly, that we are looking to be able to have our own autonomy in setting our own salaries. It's the same idea of having our own autonomy to decide what to do with our monuments. We're looking for more autonomy from the General Assembly as we're bucking against the Dillon rule. So, but if somebody's ready to create an amendment tonight, then we need to entertain it. But right now, I don't know if we're there yet.
I think in regards to amendments, if we were to consider one or two specific models to move forward.
But
Sure,
even the
go ahead.
resolution tonight, we still would have to come back and vote and agree on whatever
On the 17th.
terms of like after they approve. Like, this is not something that.
Sure, oh, yeah.
That we would need to approve and have finalized today. We're just
Oh, no.
asking.
I mean, based on
Yeah.
what we've got written.
But
No,
this
we
is
don't-
still an open-ended
This is
charter.
open-ended, charter change. The
With no-
change to
no-
give us autonomy to make our own decisions, that's what it is.
But there's no limits.
Right, because that's gonna.
So a future council could, by making this charter change, future council say, we're gonna pay each other 100, I'm making up numbers, like, let's just get a little extreme here. I just think there's not a lot of control here. I'm not comfortable with that lack
So
of
then we need
control.
to, then what is the amendment to put the control in? That's all I'm asking.
In Alexandria, they had a study commission, which put it in the realm of policy, that just looking online. But I just want to say one thing about I think that the idea of indexing is like very interesting, but I think it sets up crazy incentives about somebody quitting their job to get full-time on whatever the council, the government salary is, the city has really good benefits. So even talking about benefits, I just think that needs to be cooked a little more. I also want to, we're in a very acute phase right now, guys, because we have an acting clerk. We had a longtime clerk who was also the chief of staff, was in the city for 8 years. A lot of capacity has gone away, so there's a lot of work that's being done right now that hopefully is going to be solved. I mean, I'm thinking about like I think I told the story before, in my first month as mayor, before I started trying to put together a whole staff, I was up at 3 a.m. writing letters to constituents about the fourth day about the school shutdown with the snow issues. And I'm like sitting there composing emails at 3 a.m. because I didn't know that that's something that staff was supposed to do. I mean, but I was getting the emails and I was like, I was 2 weeks into the position, and the point is that the staff is supposed to take a lot of this work. Like right now, you guys are scheduling the interviews that we're doing with these clerk candidates or whatever, and that should be, staff should be doing a lot of what both of you all are doing, and you're very hard workers. It's absolutely appreciated, but we're really off kilter right now. We're talking about it in public, but that will go away once we have more staff. I mean, once we have a better system going on, but it's a really out of whack time right now.
I think even when we have more staff, we're still going to be putting in a lot of work.
But not if I would counter that isn't the way that should be going. We should be having vetting of all of the, one of the things that we talked about was, unlike a lot of other places in Virginia, when scheduling, I mean, the public should know, like when we get emails, nobody reads those emails. Those just go into the individual counselor's inbox. And that's one of the reasons that it's hard for us to respond a lot of the time. And it just is, because it's overwhelming. So the idea of staff was you have systems running all that stuff like they do in other councils, and it really becomes part-time with this modern age of like 1 million communications coming 24/7 to your phone. That's the idea. So, but we're not there right now.
I agree. We're not there. I think there's a lot of transition happening right now, and I also just feel like, we talked about with Mr. Blair, I think we need to take this next year and really look at our charter really holistically, and have a group of folks that are focused on really putting the thought into that and then bringing it back to council for consideration, because there has been a lot of things that have been brought up by the public in the last year over even our form of government, and I just feel like we haven't been able to kind of really dedicate the resources, because we're in this transition time, to really do that thoughtfully. And I just feel like right now with what's presented in front of us, it's very open-ended, and I don't know that it has the controls in the place that I'm not comfortable going in that direction. And I as I mentioned 2 weeks ago, I just felt like I know everyone wants to do things right now, and I am also personally to do things right now, but I don't think we have all the information. We're in a position tonight to make a decision on this. I don't feel that way.
So even in the open-ended method, what's the harm in just sending it up to the General Assembly and trying?
So,
I mean,
Mr.
we all know
Blair-
that something needs to be done. What hurts? And that's just trying.
So
Go ahead.
Can
Sorry.
I ask so what you're saying is that what we do today, the possibility of it going into effect, whatever we decide, would be.
Well, what you're deciding tonight is in effect a request to the General Assembly to amend the charter. At that point, it's truly up to the legislators in Richmond. And then if they were to approve the charter amendment, it would probably come into effect July 1, as do most state laws. Saying that, what's the harm? I think that there is and just to let you know, there is a provision in the state code that if you hold this hearing and this isn't introduced by a legislator, it can't be brought up again by the council, the exact same amendment tonight about the salaries. So then there would need to it would need to go through a different process. But again, this is an open-ended amendment that you're talking about tonight. And certainly, again, like you stated, this is more procedural right now in terms of it still has many layers to get through, even if it's if the resolution is passed by council tonight.
May I ask a question of Mr. Blair? So, Mr. Blair, then, if the General Assembly rejects our request, and this council, though, in the interim year, does have a commission that looks holistically at the charter, including a more robust investigation as to what would be a just compensation for counselors. If there is another request next year for changing the council's salary, but it is decidedly and discernibly different than this one, with caps and with formulas, do you think that would be different enough so that it could be entertained again by General Assembly?
Yes, I think if you were to take a completely substantively different amendment to the General Assembly next year, let's say that this failed, again, and if you want, I can give you the exact citation here. If it was introduced at the session and the General Assembly failed to enact this specific bill, then it doesn't, as long as it's introduced, it doesn't have to, the exact same amendment would not have to be approved by voters. Mm-hmm. However, if it's not introduced, if you wanted to do this exact same amendment, then it would have to be approved by voters for the General Assembly to even consider the charter change.
Okay, so are there any more comments? All right, is there a motion?
So moved.
What do you motion?
The motion as instructed, or excuse me, as was created by Mr. Blair, the one that's in our packet.
So, Mr. Bellamy, your motion is to adopt the charter amendment as proposed.
I'm sorry, say it again.
Your motion is to adopt the charter amendment as proposed by our attorney?
Yes, ma'am, Mr. Blair.
And is that adequate?
Yes, as presented.
Okay, is there a second?
I second that.
Okay, any other comments? All right, no vote. Okay, that carries 3-2. All right. All right, next we have the presentations of fiscal year 2018 financial audit by city auditors, and we'll have Director of Finance, Mr. Chris Cullinan.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council. My name is Chris Cullinan. I'm the Director of Finance for the city. The next two items on the agenda pertain to the financial results for the fiscal year ending June 30th of 2018, FY18. First, there'll be a report from Mr. John Aldrich, partner with the firm of Brown Edwards, the city's independent auditors. The second item is a year-end appropriation and public hearing. Invite Mr. Aldridge to join us here. He'll be referring to two documents that you have in front of you. One is titled "The Letter to Those Charged with Governance." The other one is a copy of the actual financial report, about 171 pages, for your reading pleasure. We anticipate having that document posted on the city's website tomorrow and available for folks to look into. So with that, Mr. John Aldridge with Brown Edwards.
All right. Thank you all for having me. And every time I come to one of these meetings, I really, truly appreciate what you do and all the things that come before you all. So with that being said, just to give you just a brief background, and I'm going to keep this very high level, but happy to answer questions as we go. The audit process begins in late April and it ends November 30th. The report has to be filed with the state of Virginia on November 30th of every year. Yours was filed about 6:45 p.m. Friday night. So you're in compliance with all the rules and regulations with the state as far as filings go. The actual document you have in front of you, the large one, I'm just going to touch on a few pages. I just want to mention to you all. On page number 21, you have the section there just says Independent Auditor's Report. This is our, I guess, opinion on the financial statements. The most important part there is actually on the next page where it says opinions, and it says, in our opinion, the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material respects. What that simply means is we issued an unmodified or a clean opinion. That's as good as it gets. So that's the highest level of assurance we will put on a financial report. So we issue you all a clean opinion. All right. On page number, and again, if I skip over something, please yell, but on page number 40, I do just want to point out something that's new this year that has not been in the financial report in the past and booked. There's a new liability you'll notice it's called Net Other Post-Employment Benefits Liability. This is the cost of insurance for retirees, meaning a person earns it while they're here. You need to pick up that liability while they're still here. And if you'll notice, this is the first time that's been on the books. And for the city, that liability is $44 million. And for the school board, that number is $12.7 million. And again, this isn't the pension. This is something totally different, just the health insurance piece of it. So that's something, again, that really how it's going to work day to day for you all, it's not going to change things much. However, this gets the reader out there and lets them know the city does have a liability for this out there. This is the true cost we want to recognize while the employees are still in the building, not after they're retired. So they're earning it while they're here, and so that's why you see that liability there. What you're more interested in and how you manage the city, you'll actually find on page number 42. On page 42, you can see the various funds of the city, and the biggest one being the general fund, and that's how you all manage the operations of the city. And the part I always like to look at is the actual fund balance. Okay, that's what's left over after assets and liabilities. You've got different categories. The piece you want to focus on is this part there at the end, unassigned fund balance. What that simply represents are funds that the city has accumulated that aren't for a specific project or any earmarks. It's not debt money. It's not anything else. It's money that you as a group, as a council, could decide what we want to do with it. And what I like to do is say, how does that compare to our monthly expenditures? And how many months do we have in fund balance? And if you did that exercise for the city of Charlottesville, you have 2.58 months in fund balance, meaning if you didn't collect another dime, how long could we make it if everything was steady? The bare bones minimum that the Government Finance Officers Association would say you need to have is 2 months. So you're above that. Best practices say 5 months is what you should shoot for, but very few governments have that. But again, 2.5 last year was 3.8, and the year before 2.79. So it's been fairly consistent the last few years. But again, just something to monitor. The thing that makes it different, and I get the question, what's the magic number for us? There isn't one because every locality is different. I mean, Charlottesville is very diverse in your industries, what you have, who's paying the taxes. Where it gets a little hairy is if you're in a small locality, you've got the 1 or 2 manufacturing plants that employ everybody.
Right.
Well, if you've got that situation, that number needs to be higher.
Got it.
Because they could go out of business, layoffs, we need better reserves. But in a metropolitan area like Charlottesville, what you have on, 2.5, I could see that someone saying that's reasonable. But again, what you have to monitor that is, do we have that one big employer, if they left, would it really put a dent in us? Okay? Again, you're fortunate you don't have that per se. I mean, you've got the university, but I don't think they're going anywhere anytime soon. All right. Then the other thing that I find fascinating in this report, and again, I'm the accountant, I think it's all fascinating, but I do just want to mention to you all, page 47, I think this is interesting and something you ought to be aware of. This is a little bit different. This, you will see, you have what they call business type activities. And the reason they call those business type activities, they're supposed to be set up like a business and have charges in there that cover their cost. And what you will notice there, your water, you had operating income there, sewer, operating income, gas, operating income, stormwater, we had operating income. But the one that stands out is the golf course. And so if you look at the golf course and the golf fund, looking at it on its own, well, our charges didn't cover. I'm sorry, that's page 47.
I don't have that on.
Y'all don't have that one? It should be Exhibit E2. Y'all have that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right there.
Exhibit E2.
Where's the golf thing?
The golf should be the fifth column over from the left.
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
Yeah, columns,
Oh,
I'm
it's
sorry.
columns.
Sorry.
Yes,
Okay.
columns, yes, sorry,
Okay.
apologize. But if you notice there, that column represents the fund, and you'll see there the operating income, they actually had a loss of $103,000. Okay, so the question is, well, how did we make it? Well, what you can see, if you go down the page, the general fund had to transfer $133,000 over there. Okay, just something to be aware of. What we find oftentimes, localities, golf courses, a lot of times they roll those back into Parks and Rec after a few years because they find they're not set up to cover themselves. We have a couple clients that do have golf courses and they're doing all right, but I would say a lot of them that have them are down in Parks and Rec and kind of just back in the general fund is kind of a benefit for our citizens. But it's kind of nice, though, I would say, having it out on its own because you can see they're not covering their costs.
Do you know what they're doing differently? Or you don't look at that aspect?
Well, the only thing I would mention to you is just getting people out there, getting golfers out there, how much they're using it. Again, one of those is in Northern Virginia, and quite frankly, it's probably one of the only more affordable places you could go. So people are saying, we'll go to the municipal golf course and we can afford that. So that's something to be aware of.
But by rolling it back into Parks and Recreation, most municipalities don't expect 100% cost recovery, correct?
Exactly.
So,
It's a decision the council would have to make,
Just
saying,
moves it from here.
is this what we're going to do?
where we are today.
Basically, you're using tax money now, $133,000 this
Anyway,
past year.
yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
So.
Yeah, that's something to think about. Then, if you would go over to page 100 and starts on 104. I always like to point out the good things as well. If you look on page 104, you have the budget to actual statement for the city this year, and this is for the general fund. The first section you have are the revenues, and that continues over to page 105. And you all budgeted revenues of $162.2 million, and you will notice that the actual came in at $163 million. So you exceeded your budget on revenues by a little bit under $1 million, so $896,000. Well, then the next question is, well, how did we do with expenditures? Well, you can see that if you go 2 pages over to page 107, your budgeted expenditures were $152 million. Your actual expenditures this past year were $140 million. And that's like right third line from the, or second line from the bottom on page 107. So you can see there you were under budgeted expenditures by $11,540,000 this year. And again, if you walked your way back up the page, you can see where those savings were. They're basically split among several different departments and functions within the city. Okay. But again, the thing we look at is, did the cities overspend their budget? And I'm happy to say you did not. You certainly, you had $11 million there of expenditures you didn't use up. The last thing I will mention in this report, and I think it's something to be commended, you all as a governing body. As we do your audit, we also do the audit for the school system. And the school system's financial information begins on page 136. What I like to point out to you all is if you look there at their financial statements beginning on 136, and go to the next page, 137, you will see there the revenues for the school system. And the city, their total revenues at the schools this year for all their funds were $73 million. The city kicked in out of that $44 million. So you're paying more than half of the revenues that the city or the school system has. And what we find there, the intergovernmental, that's going to be your federal money and your state money, okay? Most of those haven't really gone up a lot over the years. And as a result, what we're finding is localities are having to kick in more money to keep that same basic level of service or even improve upon it. But again, that's something just to point out, that out of the $73 million, the city paid $44 million of the schools. What's going on over there. And again, it just shows that you certainly value the school system to take that larger percentage in what they're doing.
Can you give a sense of how that compares in the Virginia school system?
I'd be happy to give it. I have actually a chart at the office that I will email Mr. Cullinan, and he can provide to you all. I have a chart, what I did, and I wish I'd have brought it, but it kind of lines you up next to Lynchburg, Danville, Roanoke, similar, urban centers, cities kind of outside the DC area, but more, the Danville, the Lynchburg, the Roanoke, Charlottesville, very like size, the school system and what they're doing. So that would be a good example for you all. But again, if memory serves me right, you were definitely on the high side. What your percentage, what you were all paying. I do recall Danville got quite a bit more state and federal money than you all did. So, but that's just, like I said, a 20,000-foot view of the audit. It, like I mentioned, it starts in April. In addition to this, we have to test any federal money that comes through here, a certain percentage of it. That report is almost done. I reviewed a draft of it earlier today. That should be issued any time now. To my knowledge, the federal money, if I recall, I don't think there were any findings at all related to the programs we tested there. Again, it's not final. But overall, it was a good audit. Your staff does a nice job of pulling this together. They prepare this document. We simply put an opinion on it. I mean, we audit the numbers in there. We get an understanding of what goes behind making these numbers, make it to the financial report. But again, at the end of the day, your staff is preparing this, and there's a lot of people touching it in their staff and in that department, and they do a nice job on it. So. With that, the other document you have, I'm briefly just going to mention it. It just kind of spells out what the audit represents. 90% of that's boilerplate language. It says at the end of the day, the audit is, these are your financial statements, not mine. Talks about if we had disagreements with management, there were none. Talks about if there were difficulties in dealing with management, there were none. So again, that's pretty much standard information there, just to give you a sense of what we encountered in working with the city and their staff. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions or follow up on anything that you all have.
I do have a question, and it might be just related to something Mr. Cullinan would be able to answer, but I know there's a relationship between a good audit report and then our bond rating. So how important is this compared to our bond rating? I mean,
They go hand in glove. For example, Mr. Aldridge mentioned the approximately $30.5 million of fund balance. That's the 17% reserve that we have set as part of our long-term financial policies. And so, they're intertwined with each other in terms of the audit. We have policies that say this is what we're going to do. The audit then verifies that we are doing that, that we are following those guidelines, and the numbers bear that out.
Good, thank you.
One thing I will mention, that bond rating people have come to us and said, and I've said in seminars, with the pension liability and with that other post-employment benefit, they have asked that localities at least have a plan how they're going to fund it, meaning they don't expect you to go issue debt for $44 million to make that liability go away, but they would like to know what do we have? What is our plan to address this $44 million? Are we setting aside a little bit? What are we doing here to address it and just not ignoring it?
And if I could add to that, the city actually did that a number of years ago. So, in the media, the reporting is most often on these cities, when you see cities in distress, they really are focusing on the pension. They're not even talking about the other post-employment benefits or the OPEB. That's sort of the other shoe, so to speak. And certainly, we've done some significant things in the last year or two in terms of our pension plan, in terms of doing a sustainability study, looking at how current employees all contribute to that, how new employees contribute. But a number of years ago, the city made a conscious decision to start funding its OPEB. And so our OPEB is actually funded at 44, I believe it's about 44.7%. I dare say that's probably one of the highest ones out there, but now we'll know for sure because now everybody has to report this. Before, I think that's one of the important things, and this is in the transmittal letter from Mr. Murphy and myself, is that this is not a new liability. This has always been there. We've been funding 100% of our contribution for a number of years, and we anticipate to do so into the future. But most cities have not, and they've not been reporting in a consistent manner. So now you'll be able to see how we stack up to other folks. When you hear folks talk about their pension funded status, it's just the pension piece. There's also this OPEB piece that's been out there, and even places that say we have a 100% or a 95% funded pension. That's great, but the better question is what's your OPEB funding? Because again, that's sort of the piece that nobody really talks about, and it hasn't been reported on in a consistent manner, but now it will be.
We had clients in the past that controlled that number or tried to by basically grandfathering everybody, saying if you were hired after this date, the minute you leave the city or county, you're not on our insurance anymore. You can't even pay. You're done. Mm-hmm. And so that's a way to cut it down. I think it was kind of knee-jerk. They just thought we can do this and make it go away. But I think most people have just kind of tweaked what they have.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So you're going to send that?
Yes, I'll send it to Chris and I'll send it to him tomorrow. So he'll have like a spreadsheet, just kind of lines you up, say, okay, how much for each of the school systems, what percentage is the locality paying versus the state versus the feds?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've got it. I just don't have it with me.
Okay.
If I could just add one more item as it relates to the Gulf Fund. For a number of years, it did operate as an enterprise fund in terms of its revenues covering its expenses. But a number of years ago, that wasn't always the case. It was results very similar to what you see. Some years it was a little bit ahead. Some years the general fund had to make a subsidy. I believe it was 1 or 2 fiscal years ago, Parks and Rec brought forth a proposal to formalize that subsidy, to make that part of the general fund budget, which council did at that time. So it's accounted for as an enterprise fund, but in reality, it's budgeted with a small general fund subsidy in it. And so, and again, that'll be a similar discussion we'll have as we head into budget season for FY20 with Mr. Daly and his folks in terms of not just the golf fund, but parks and recreation programs in general, and what's an appropriate level of revenue recovery and fees. But the results that you see here were one that was planned on, and like I said, council has actually made that conscious decision a year or two ago to actually start providing a small general fund subsidy to the golf fund.
I have a quick question for other localities that you have audited that have taken maybe large bond initiatives for like affordable housing projects, something that we're considering now. Is there any, I don't know if it's appropriate, but any advice that you can give of how they were successful?
Not really. I mean, I think the key, what I've seen, and it's been fairly rare. I've seen things from these CDBG grants and things like that have kind of helped. What I've found the best thing is make sure all the players are talking. Everybody talks to each other, because you might have the planning department has this grandiose idea that's great, and they sell it to the public, but they've never talked about how we're going to pay for this. Make sure is it legal even. Make sure the legal guys are on board and folks, it's the worst thing is you get to the end and realize everything we've done is wrong. It's not legal. So definitely bring in your legal counsel. But the key I've found is just communication on that stuff. And make sure the money's there. I mean, it's one thing to have all these dreams, but if there's no money there, then we're kind of wasting time. So we really have to work on that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other question?
I'd just like to say thank you to our finance staff, Mr. Cullinan, thank you, and your team. Sounds like you're keeping the city honest, and really appreciate that and appreciate your thoroughness.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Outstanding job, Mr. Cullinan.
You got it from here.
All
Good to see
right,
you all.
thank you. Have a
Thank
good
you.
evening.
Moving on to the next agenda item is the year-end appropriation and public hearing. And so, as Mr. Aldridge mentioned, the city general fund ended FY18 with a surplus, a positive balance of about $4.7 million, or about 2.7% within the adopted budget, which from a budgeting efficiency standpoint is a pretty good result. Revenues for the general fund were slightly less than $2 million to the good, with expenses being about $2.7 million under budget. And that combination of revenues doing better than expected and
I'm
expenditures
sorry.
being less. I'm sorry.
Which page are you?
We're actually on the agenda item
Agenda,
for
okay.
this. Apologize.
I didn't know if it was somewhere.
Gave you a lot of paper this evening. And so that trend of revenues doing better than expected and expenditures being less than budgeted is what we've seen in the past. That's sort of typically how our surpluses have been generated. And just to provide some point of context, that $4.7 million last year for FY17, the surplus was about $8.9 million. FY16 was about $6 million. And this year's, in those 2 years, we had commercial assessments come in higher than expected, and that actually occurs over 2 fiscal years. And so those accounted for those surpluses being as large as they were. And so this year's result is a little more in line with what we saw from maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago. On the revenue side, real estate taxes, personal property taxes, taxes on bank stock, and business and professional licenses, or BPOL, were some of the revenues that performed notably well. On the expenditure side, they were, the savings were across the city, but we call out a few departments for their savings: the Commonwealth's Attorney, Parks and Recreation, Public Works. And the thing that really generates a lot of the savings are either position vacancies or positions being held open for some period of time. As you know, some departments have gone through some reorganization, and so department heads are taking a more strategic look at their vacancies, which is not only good from a programmatic standpoint, but obviously in terms of budget, it does generate savings when we do that. We've also had retirements of fairly senior city staff, and so when they leave, not only is there a vacancy savings while we search for their replacement, typically they're being replaced by somebody who doesn't make as much as they did. You can imagine a tenured 30-year city employee makes one amount. Somebody who comes in with maybe 5 or 10 years of experience is somewhere less than that. So that results in some savings as well. And so staff is recommending for the year-end appropriation for the general fund of the $4.7 million. We're recommending 3 uses of that. The first is a citywide reserve for unplanned expenses of approximately $1 million. As you're all aware, we had unbudgeted expenditures of a little over $900,000 for the events of this past August 12th weekend, which we did not budget for. We've been working with the Virginia Department of Emergency Management in terms of the possibility of public assistance. We continue having discussions with that agency. However, much like last year, this is a program of last resort. I anticipate that we will probably wind up in the same position where we were last year, where it's just not an appropriate mechanism for the city. However, we do continue to pursue that. And I mean, if we are successful in getting public assistance, we would get about 71 cents on the dollar. So there would still be some portion that we wouldn't be made whole. And so this amount will allow us, as the fiscal year goes along, if departments need additional assistance to make payroll, other budgetary shortfalls, this allows us to have the funds to take care of that. City also owes approximately $150,000 in mutual aid to other jurisdictions who helped out that weekend. We certainly want to take care of those expenses. The second use is a transfer of about $500,000 to the retirement fund. Every year when we calculate the annual contribution for retirement benefits, including OPEB, as we've discussed this evening, we're assuming that retirees will receive a half of the COLA that general employees do, and we typically anticipate that COLA to be 2% for active employees, thus 1% for the retirees. For this fiscal year, the COLA is actually a little bit higher at 3%. And so we should have been putting 1.5% away. We put so we're about 0.5% short. This $500,000 just makes that whole in the current fiscal year. And then the final use, the balance of $3.2 million, we're recommending being transferred to the Capital Projects Fund to be reserved for affordable housing redevelopment. There are some other appropriations here as well for the other cities' other 34 funds, predominantly sort of housekeeping matters or in instances where there are fiduciary funds involved that carry over automatically, or decisions made by past councils to carry over certain balances automatically every year, fill out the rest of the appropriation. And so I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. We do have a public hearing on this, and so that's all I've got.
Okay. Are there any questions? Okay.
Thank
So I'll
you.
open.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Open the public hearing. We have one person signed up, and I'll invite anyone else. Waldheim.
All right, one more time. As you know, I came back in April during budget season and asked for funding for the Human Rights Commission position of enforcement and compliance. We've been at this for many, many years. The council's making some good progress. You've had meetings with the Human Rights Commission. You've worked toward having a work share agreement with the EEOC. You've required them to now meet with you quarterly so that they stay on track. And now I think you're also asking them to stay on track with their policy work, which has been all over the map. So those are all really positive steps. When this all started, I swear to you, the thing that started me on this whole thing was I was at a meeting at Charlottesville High School at the end of the Dialogue on Race, and there were a bunch of low-income folks in this town who were gathered around putting stickers on sheets of how to prioritize what the Dialogue on Race was supposed to be doing. And what I heard over and over at that point was, we need a place to bring our complaints of housing and employment discrimination so that they're resolved. And that was the original intention of the Human Rights Commission. That's the only part of it that hasn't been fulfilled. And now I'm asking you, you have a surplus, and you don't have to take it out of the equity fund, but there's a surplus now, and I think there's room in there somewhere for you to make a commitment. And all I'm asking for at this point is just to think about a 3-year pilot project. 3 years at $100,000 to hire a compliance officer, put that compliance officer in the city attorney's office, and let them build a program for 3 years where they can actually fulfill the promise of the Dialogue on Race and the Human Rights Commission to actually solve people's employment discrimination complaints. Because if we think we can bring new jobs to this city without addressing the racial, the age, the gender discrimination that's going on in town, then we're sorely, sorely wrong, right? So all I'm asking you to do is to think about taking some of that surplus, $300,000, hiring a compliance officer, as a pilot project, let them build a program that builds some trust with the city citizens, that they understand that this is a place where their complaints are really going to be addressed, and let them do their work. And if at the end of 3 years you don't see some evaluation data that shows that people are this is actually having an impact on people's lives, then you can terminate the program. So that's all I'm asking, is to think about this surplus in terms of equity. And it's tied to housing, too. We can't have equitable housing in this town without some form of a process for people who go to rent an apartment or a townhouse and they get denied because of their race, their age, their gender, or whatever. We can't have equitable housing in this town without a process for people to get those complaints addressed. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
Mark Cabot. I'm not asking that the money be used for this purpose, but something I think you all need to be aware of and think about long-term is I hear this all the time from long-term residents that are very concerned about their property taxes and what they're paying, and concerned that whether or not they're going to be able to remain in their houses in retirement because they're concerned that they may get priced out of affordability. So at some point, I think we need to look at that and address that. Maybe something can be done for seniors, or we need to try to roll back some of the property tax rates, especially with some of the online projects that are coming on board that bring in new tax dollars. But it just needs to be a concern that you all need addressed on a long-term basis. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Okay, closing the public hearing. Any comments?
I have a quick one. We had very helpful meetings with Mr. Murphy and staff last week about this, and having been through it a couple times the last couple of years, I think all that we talk about the public getting and us narrating and explaining and having a real connection about what's happening with what we're doing, this is really important. There's a ton of confusion about what the surplus means, why we have it. It's a result of having really good conservative budgeting. At the end of the year, you have this so-called surplus. But I think right now, 3.2 million in this proposal out of the how much is it? 4.7 is slated for affordable housing. That is it. But I wish that we could put that in red blinking lights above this, and that we could really explain to the public how serious of a commitment that is as a down payment if we vote for it, which I think we should, on the whole discussion we're having. So it's over $3 million right into, and it would go through the CIP, but it's not the CIP reserve fund, which is typically where it goes. This is earmarked for affordable housing. It's and redevelopment. Earmarked for redevelopment. So it is getting the ball rolling. It is putting 80% of this into that one need, which is blaring loud and clear from the community, and we need to do everything we can on the staff side to make sure that that breaks through, because sometimes it gets, the stories the last couple of years about what happened with the surplus have been very hard to, it has not broken through, I think. That's just a thought.
Okay. And I had was there someone? So I asked Mr. Murphy to look at whether, especially since, and let me do a disclaimer first, I'm a current employee of Parks and Recreation. What I'm about to say I would not benefit from. I would not be one of the employees considered for compression issues. I'm a temporary part-time employee and did benefit from the living wage, but this is separate. So with saying that, I asked Mr. Murphy to look into, especially with the figures that came in during our luncheons, and as an employee, we heard consistently about the compression issues in Public Works. I'm aware of it in Parks and Rec. We didn't have a significant number of those employees. And the transit, the CAT drivers. And so I asked Mr. Murphy to look into whether we could earmark some of these funds to set for compression that would go into effect in January. And I also added, because when I was on the Social Services Advisory Board, they talked about the on-call pay for DSS on-call workers, and that it was not that hourly wage was not up to regional standards, and whether that was something that we could look into and use some of this funding to just, I know it's only a few departments and you do a little bit at a time, but to look at to see whether for those individuals it was, or anyone else that could benefit, if we could use some of this money to deal with some of those issues. I will remind everyone that every year during the living wage discussions, the compression discussion has been tied to that. And it's something based on the employee's response that hasn't been worked out to the employee's benefit. So
I raised something similar with Ms. Beauregard, and it was just my understanding that obviously these aren't sustaining funds, these are this year's funds, and so there are challenges with us getting too aggressive in how we earmark that, but if that's the case, I'm really hopeful as we look at the next budget cycle that we're doing things sooner versus later to address some of these imbalances with compensation that we've seen, not just through what we've heard, but also through the compensation study.
If I may, as I understand it, the problem with using these funds is that because it's not an annual expenditure, it's not part of the operating budget. But related to costs for our employees, I mean, you could do something like make a employer-assisted housing assistance program. Either it's through home ownership assistance or because I know housing costs is a huge problem for our employees. That's why 80% of them aren't living here. That is like a one-shot deal that you could do that would assist our employees, creating an employer-assisted housing fund.
But wouldn't,
And it's like Montgomery County in Maryland has it. I believe Austin has it. It's tied to providing either down payment assistance, even rental assistance to employees. And it is done in other localities. So that is one thing that would be a one-shot kind of seed fund to benefit employees, and it's tied to housing.
Councilor Galvin, it sounds, just as one response, that it sounds very noble, very well intentioned.
It was recommended by the RCLCO study, too.
It sounds like a great idea, but it also sounds like it would have programmatic startup costs. I mean, you'd need to have staff and applications and procedures, and that it would take it sounds like an operational thing, just the way I first hear it, as opposed to something that could be plugged in and infused, to existing needs, which is typically, that sounds like something we would have that sounds like a policy. I mean, as opposed to, that sounds corporate.
Well, it's both.
Because I don't know, how would we'd have to probably hire a staff person to run.
I'm just saying that it's both. It is
Sounds
both
really-
brick and mortar as well as policy.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
related to operations. But I'm just trying to tie this important question
I
to
don't mean to be such a
employer
wet
compensation.
blanket, it's just.
So, and it might be later on that we discuss this, but I do understand the concern about we can't use money for wages that's one shot, one shot money.
So in terms of the compression issue, the previous council has allocated a certain amount of money for the departments to decide, go through their staff and allocate that to staff to do that bump. So that is something that we have committed to.
I thought that was annual, though. I thought that was annual.
Yeah, but with the money that has been allocated in the past, there are employees who it wasn't enough money so maybe, I don't know, if maybe we should give Mr.
Let me address a couple of points in there. Yes, does the budget for the year we're in deal with compression? Yes, in two ways. One is to recognize the compression that was created by the first round of living wage adjustments that took you all to 1379. And we believe that we've tackled that problem in full. And did we also believe that in part that the 3% COLA that you all approved for this year was a step in the right direction towards dealing with compression? The answer to that is also yes. I think that in part, right, the idea with compression is if we're moving these wages up progressively to 1440, and I believe, as we form the budget, that there is some expressed will from the council that the manager's budget will suggest a $15 an hour wage for FY 2020, that we have to look at those bands above 15 or above 1440 currently and make some decisions about compression. I think that in part you've probably heard in departments not just really an argument about compression, but about classification of
Right.
positions, their current compensation for those roles, and where we're situated with regard to market, particularly in a market that has 2.2% unemployment, right? So I think that, you know, while we could look at where the complaints came from in some employee meetings with the elected officials, I could point to many other examples, matter of fact, that you all have brought to me recently about other departments that have been affected by wage issues and competition with their like departments in our region. So I think that really, for me, the year end that we proposed was, number one, to be very different than other years. You know, typically you look at December's past, this is a laundry list of departmental carryovers and this much for this program, and it's a long, long list. This is three things, and certainly we can change it in any way that is the will of the council. But I do think that the compression and market and classification and compensation are best dealt with in however we propose the budget to you and your discussions in March. I don't know, you know, we've talked about this, and, you know, the request just came in Friday. We don't know exactly how to quantify what another band of compression is outside of whether people are properly classified where they are right now. So, not, at least not with 2 or 3 days to work on it. If you wanted to put some placeholder number out there, we could do that, but there would need to be significant work to follow.
But could I ask a quick question? So in terms of how much money was allocated last year to deal with compression?
Just for the compression piece, it's around $140,000.
140.
That's what I remember in the budget.
May I-
And again, that was because we did the 3% COLA, which also addressed some of the compression. So that specific cost was not as high as it could have been had we not done the COLA. It would have been higher if the COLA had been lower. So because we did the 3%, that helped a lot. And that 3% is covered in the budget as well. That's a big number. I can't remember off the top of my head.
And Ms.
So-
Beauregard, would you just say roughly what each percent in COLA typically costs the city? And so that people understand what the magnitude of that is.
That'd be good.
Oh, gosh.
Putting you on the spot?
Totally. Have a lot of numbers in my head.
Well, can I ask a quick question while you
Sure,
think?
I'm thinking. Sure, go ahead.
So what, did you have a discussion with the department?
No, we asked
Trevor?
Human Resources to reach out, and they weren't able to reach out and get information from them today, so.
I did
Which
make direct
department?
outreach to all
He
the
did outreach
departments
as
that you
well.
request.
And then we asked HR to follow up with them, and I know I spoke to Teresa Weissmore in Galloway today, and they were trying to get out with departments, but they couldn't pull the information together by today. And so instead, I mean, Mr. Murphy and I spoke as well, and what he just said is what I would agree with as well, and that's what I said to Ms. Hill last week, was we're doing a lot of things in the 20 budget, planning for a lot of items, including the market rate. The pay for performance is an item that Mr. Murphy didn't mention, but that's going to be new next year if we can try to afford, and that's the merit increase that you may have heard about in some of your meetings that employees really want. Another COLA to help with compression, of course, the living wage increase of $15 an hour. And so there's several items we're putting together as a complete package for you all
Ms.
for the
Beauregard,
20 budget. Yes, sir.
One other thing, because I'm now back on the Social Services Board, so I know I learned in our last meeting that they are planning an additional request of 3% over.
I heard that too.
Yeah, and that's because in that particular department, they're being crushed by the labor market right now because they're
And we
gonna have
typically
two-
don't have individual departments
that-
submit their own request, so
Well,
we're going to have
it's
to look
going
at
through the
that,
process,
right?
but
That's
I'm
not
just-
typically
I'm
how
just
we've done it.
taking that in as one
Yeah, I heard about
counselor,
that
and then I
today.
also heard about the police department that they're having challenges. So I just think that we all are going to have eyes on a lot of drivers here because
Sure.
of the economy and because of there's going to be a lot of requests coming in this budget, so I think
Right.
we should be.
And we're trying to do this the right way too. We're looking at our complete compensation and pay scales to get
Yes.
them right-sized as
Yes.
well. And so I know Human Resources is working on that. So once we can right-size that, I think we can have some good data, and looking at data to determine where positions should be and where salaries should be will help a lot moving forward. So we're working on that for the 20 budget. So we just need a few more months, and then when we present your budget, the city manager's budget, then we'll have that to tell you all what we were able to do and what we could afford to do, so. And I want to say it's $3.50%, but I'd have to look that up.
I think it's in the ballpark of 400,000
Yeah, it's
per person.
that's right, yeah, so $350 to $400.
Okay. I mean, I also would like to say that we're talking about, especially with Parks and Rec and Public Works, we're probably talking about two of the lowest wage departments, correct? Like in terms of per hourly rate, without taking into account whatever it is once you add benefits. So I'm just, again, saying based on our conversations
And-
with the employees have a very different take on, you know, what's happening within the departments
Right,
than
sure.
we are hearing, and I understand. But I think if nothing else, we're talking about 140,000 for compression overall, so it's not a significant amount in terms of what this budget is. But if the social services, I've been on call, so I don't know if any of you, I was on call group home, and so you can't go really anywhere. You have to be able to respond immediately, like within a 30-minute time frame. So that should be something that shouldn't be that significant in terms of getting, if we could, you know, put in enough resources to get our social workers on call compensation up to whatever the regional, you know, standards.
I think the concern is we want to make sure we're looking at this holistically, because we certainly have heard from some people loud and clear, but I don't have a clear picture what the whole organization looks like, and then obviously when we met with the chief last week, it was eye-opening to me just to realize like how far of a gap we have there.
Oh, I understand, but our public service first responders, they got a bump at some point in the past few years. I understand the holistic, but I'm just saying in terms of if you're hearing employees, and if there's a possibility that we can do something just to let the city know we're paying attention, that employees, that we are looking at this, we can't fix everything at once, but these are some things that we can.
Madam Mayor,
Yeah.
just a suggestion, maybe one thing will be, you know, sort of like with the equity, with however we handled it last year, we kind of set aside a fund. And it could be, maybe we would, I mean, the problem, you know, so we'd take some away from this affordable housing deposit, but if we took some away from it, if it was 500,000 or just some figure, and we said that will be reserved for all compensation adjustments as we get into this new budget cycle, because we are going to be heading into that. I mean, that's what I've gotten from these social services and police conversations, is we are heading into.
These are going to be ongoing.
But understood, but it would
expenditures.
just allow us to get, absolutely, but it would allow us in the first budget cycle next year, maybe we spread it over 2 years, so it gives us a little bit of a leg up on, and it shows the public that we're taking it seriously. I mean, it's just, or as $1 million, maybe, and we say it's meant to address compensation increases as determined later across the next 2 years or something like that.
If I may
It's
add,
just
the
a-
other
it's
way to
probably-
do it
this
is
is the problem with
to have
brainstorming on the
Ms.
fly.
Beauregard and Mr. Murphy provide us with a complete package and a complete resolution on a solution to address these compression issues in a sustainable way, as opposed to giving a token kind of contribution that we can't even understand where it's going to go. I just want to be realistic and not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I
If
think
I may-
also, can I, real quick, these are not new requests, especially with the, these are requests that departments have been asking for, you know, or at least that's what, in terms of like social services, bringing the on-call pay up to regional. So this is not something that just occurred. We also have to look at, I mean, these, you know, potential allocations were made based on to try to figure out how to pay for the affordable housing options that we have on the table without taking in potentially additional money through bonding or as much bonding or something like that. So I think this also we should consider the fact that we have a lot of things that haven't been done right for a long time. And so there are a lot of people kind of looking at this. So that's also back to the discussion of how we're going to pay for some of these major things that we have on the horizon, like the affordable housing piece. And while I understand the city management attempting to figure out how to do this without taking on additional bonding funds, we're also back to, do we have enough resources to cover everything?
I think you're exactly right, particularly about that last bit. When we get to the proposal for the budget and we say we have issues with classification and compensation, and typically when we adjust to market, we're only going to the median, and that may not be adequate to compete with folks. That could be costly, and revenue could be an issue. And I would just point out that one of the traditional reluctance of staff to do compensation adjustments with year-end funds is we don't know what the accompanying revenue will be to carry forward this commitment.
Yes.
I think, if I may, we have clearly heard from the community that affordable housing is the number one issue within the city. Our efforts need to be predicated, our efforts need to be ensuring that we are not only making a good faith effort to the community, but to ourselves to show them that we are putting resources into achieving affordable housing in a variety of different ways. And I think when it comes in terms of priorities, that has to be number one. It doesn't mean that there aren't competing factors, and I agree with Mr. Murphy that there are going to be very tough decisions in regards to additional revenue, especially when we speak to the public, because what I believe many people will say is that if you have such an expansive revenue, like a multi-million-dollar surplus, then why do you need to X, and that X being the elephant in the room? Why do you need to look at a tax increase? Why do you need to look at cutting money here to do there? Why don't you just put this money there? And we need to be able to let people know that our surplus, the large majority of it, is going to address the concern that so many people talk to us about day after day, and that concern being affordable housing. That is the number one priority, at least for me. And I think for all of us, if we truly want to start to right some of the wrongs in which we've had, we have to look at affordable housing first.
But you're also saying that this is the only way to do it, right?
No, I think it's multiple ways to do it,
Yeah.
but this specific pot right here that we've already discussed and has been proposed, that we place this multi-million-dollar surplus or a portion of this multi-million-dollar surplus into affordable housing, that has to be this particular way in which we go. There's other ways to get the additional revenue that's also going to be needed, but yeah, this way, I am saying this way it's a clear way for us to get to where we need to be in that regard.
Yeah, but also the way that this is being presented, it doesn't it didn't have to be presented this way. That's all I'm saying. I think that if we at least, I like Councilor Signer's idea in terms of we're going to have a lot of competing interests.
Mm-hmm.
So during this budget cycle, if we could earmark
a fund similar to the equity fund and whatnot.
Some of this to say that we are going to add it to whatever we would have allocated in the budget, because we would have had to put some money, correct, towards, yes, the budget coming up towards compression and those type of issues. So if we can add some funding to it, it'll be a more robust study, but we'll still have some of this committed to it.
I would agree with both of you, so I'm fine with that. All I'm saying is, let's not touch the affordable housing money. That money, that 3.2, that has to
But I also
stay.
want you to look at, we're talking about under budget in departments that need, that the employees are saying they need so what I'm saying is that maybe this presentation of this revenue wasn't like the best, even if you want to put a large chunk of it towards. I'm just asking for us to listen in terms of how we allow employees to know that we're listening, to them also. And if we want to wait instead of doing it, something that would take effect in January, to have staff be able to look at it, I just think we're going to get probably the minimum that we can use out of this budget cycle, and then we'll have some more to add to it if we just set aside some of this funding.
So I would just interject at this point that, keep in mind, we could spend the money in January, or you could could do a set aside, as Councilor Signer has suggested, and, have that be part of the FY 2020 budget. But again, whenever you decide, the following year there needs to be corresponding revenue along with it, right?
Yeah.
So expenditure in January means that you would have to make a commitment that staff doesn't know about today in April with a budget line item. And if we create a budget that's dependent upon one-time money in what we present to you in the spring, then we're kind of betting on the future council in the following year giving us the revenue, right? Or making the cuts in order to pay for that decision. And so, I mean, there is that delay, and I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page about that.
But is this separate from the process that would take place with the compensation study and what we know that we have to do anyway to fix those middle range, employee salaries that have not been adequately adjusted, right? That's even the study is saying.
But that's coming from operational funding that we know we have to sustain year over year, which is a whole separate. So yes, they have to go find that. And I would challenge us to really look hard, and I think we should be more aggressive with what the options that are presented to us and go find and make those hard decisions. But it's coming from from my understanding, it's just a totally different bucket.
Yeah.
This is one time like usually capital money, and that is operational funding. And so the whole goal here is that going into this next budget cycle, they're going to go find on the operational side, so it is sustaining, but something might be compromised to get there. But right now, there's a lot of risk with just betting on a current lump sum that we don't know to be guaranteed in the future. Unless we wanted to, she and I talked about, unless we wanted to just do like a bonus structure as a one-time, one-off thing.
And I just have a point of order question.
What'd you say?
So,
Leslie, you weren't talking to.
No, I was just saying, when Ms. Hill and I spoke last week, I mean, a bonus is kind of one time, it doesn't add to the base pay, but that's not what you're all trying to fix.
right.
I mean, so it's just more of a, let's
using
feel
an example,
good and give folks a bonus, which we've done before with year-end money. But it's been one time and it hasn't added to the budget for the next year. So we've been fine with doing that in the past. And we've done that in years that we didn't give COLAs, for instance. Some of you, Kathy, you may remember when we did those. But again, that doesn't fix the structural issues that you all are talking about.
It sounds to me, having floated the idea, it does sound like, given what is coming down the pike to us in this budget cycle, and given what we just heard about redevelopment, that would be the most logical to put it all toward, like what Mr. Bellamy said, to put it all toward housing as one time and redevelopment, even though I can see the argument for this as a compromise measure, but there's such a clear distinction between capital, one-time expenses, and operating. And if anything, if we did put it back toward all redevelopment, then it buys us maybe a little bit of flexibility there, because we're going to have that cost driver going to this budget cycle on top of all the salary issues that we're going to deal with. So we will know, we can say to the public, look, we put it all toward redevelopment. Now we also have to juggle a lot of compensation questions this budget cycle.
So I guess my point of order question is, so Mr. Cullen, and are you looking for a motion to adopt this appropriation recommendation?
Tonight is the first of two readings.
Okay.
And so if it's council's will to amend the appropriation as it's currently written, you'd have a chance to vote out at your next meeting.
At the next meeting. I just would like, for the record, I do want to call a question. I want to accept the appropriations as recommended by staff and move it on to the next meeting for final vote.
I would like the same.
Okay. Sounds good. So we'll be on the consent. All right. We won't drag you
Well,
out.
well, I
Be on
wanna
the
confirm that.
consent- It will be on the consent as presented.
As
Right.
presented.
Right.
That's what they're
No
saying.
amendments, just as
Right.
presented.
I would
as
have
is.
preferred amendments, just want to put it out there for the news.
This is why it's so different. You're a new rule for us because we're so used to taking a vote.
Yeah,
we
so
know.
we're not
So is
voting.
there anything extra we should do so that we know?
No.
I mean, are there? It
We'll
sounds like
just
there
be
are
able to
other
vote
votes.
for it
Right.
next meeting.
The only
Well, but it's
question
gonna be on
we're
the
trying to
consent agenda.
confirm, and I think Mr. Blair's trying to get us there, is it okay for he and I to put it on your consent
Yes.
agenda?
Yes.
Or
I'm
did you
okay
want to
with
debate it again on 12/17?
Yes.
You don't want to debate it, Mr. Bellamy. You
We've
want
just
it on the
debated-
consent agenda.
We just debated it.
Okay,
Okay.
Yeah, so, yeah,
Me too.
that's it. It's
Okay,
on the
good.
consent agenda.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Can we have a little break?
Yep.
Thank you.
Mr. Alfali, I apologize. We're
5
going to have a
minutes.
5-minute break.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm here till it's done.
It's so funny, man. Selection show like this better not do it. You want any cold coffee?